Hello, hello, hello. Welcome all. How's it going, guys? How's it going? I hope you're all doing well today. I'm just still kind of setting some stuff up, but we got a decently interesting chatting stream, by the way. Interesting chatting stream. Sorry for the echoing there. Black Lion Guard, thank you for the tier 1. Are you excited for this stacked anime season? JJK, Freerin, Trigun? Yes. I'm actually watching Spy Family's 3rd season right now. It's actually pretty good. I don't read the Spy Family manga, so the anime is kind of like the only thing I know about it. And I was really kind of disappointed with most of season 2. Like the Yor boat arc was really good. But then after that, it kind of became a lot more on the slice of life side, which I know like Spy Family is kind of like a hybrid of like a slice of life meets actually kind of like a spy thriller at the same time. It's kind of both of those things. But I feel like I lock into that series way more whenever it's trying to be the spy thriller, because the actual world building in Spy Family is next level, and the character writing is too, whenever they choose to focus on it, right? And so, I don't have anything against slice of life necessarily. It's just like whenever it's being slice of life, it just kind of it just feels like damn. But like whenever you guys are actually trying to move the plot forward, it's so good. It's so good. And so this season has like really been moving the plot forward. And so Spy Family feels like 80% filler and 20% relevant episodes. It does. but the actual like 20% that moves the plot forward is so fucking good that I tolerate the less than, and I don't want to say all the slice of life stuff is bad, because a lot of it is like really funny and endearing, but like whenever it is actually focused on moving the plot forward and being a spy thriller, it's so good. It's kind of a shame, and again, I don't want to knock the slice of life stuff because it can be really funny and good. It's just like, damn, if they focused on being a spy thriller, it probably would have been like a top 10, top 20 anime of all time. You know what I'm saying? It like it's fun, but it's just like, dang, they kind of missed an opportunity to be one of the best anime and manga of all time. I feel like for a while it was just the Anya show, right? And then in season 3, they've kind of corrected it to making it about the Spy Family again. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like everyone being an actual character and coming together, and that's when it's good. That's when Spy Family is at peak. And that's when I'm like, damn, this anime is so good. And then like it just kind of becomes like the misadventures of Anya, and it's like a funny like little gag comic type show, but it's just like, damn, bro, get back to the spy thriller stuff. That's so good. With like the really top tier like world building stuff that they have in there. And of course, I'm a big fan of Freerin as well. That's also top shelf stuff. I think Freerin is also why I think like an FF14 anime would be like now would be the time to strike, because I don't know what else to call this genre other than Japanese medieval. You know what I'm saying? Like Japan's interpretation of like medieval fantasy and like RPG-esque stuff. I think 14 is like really fit for that. So I mean, 14 basically is that, so it'd be a good time to like have a 14 anime out. Yeah, Freerin is an instant classic. Freerin is like one of the few, I wouldn't say one of the few, but it's like one of the top animes that gets me like really kind of emotional thinking about it, because I find Freerin's character just so tragic, right? How she kind of persists and endures despite having to outlive everything she will ever grow to love. That to me is like a super painful concept to like really think about. And the ending theme of Freerin, at least of the first season, Again, just pain. Every time I hear it, pain. um, I didn't quite get it in the first episode, and then it clicked, and I had a complete 180, and it was easily my favorite anime of the year. Yeah, it. If when I first watched it was one of those situations where I was like, "Is this good, or do you guys just?" Or is it just one of those, like, you know what I'm saying, like one of those animes that just every now and then I feel like a very, like, I don't want to say mid, but mid to be honest, anime will get popular, and it'll be like for frivolous reasons, like they just think the character is cute, or it has a couple of funny moments, and it's not actually great. It's not cinema when you watch it, you know what I'm saying? But actually with Frieren, it was good. New hair? No, this is the same. Well, same here. I probably just styled my hair and brushed it a little bit better today, that's all. I find new anime clips on TikTok making fun of a moment. Wait, making fun of what moment? Oh, you find it new via making. Oh, okay, I get it. I'm sorry, I misread you, Jonah. Um, yeah, it's actually really funny because you guys know how I found Apothecary Diaries. It's actually really funny how I discovered that anime. By the way, one of the best animes that's like currently ongoing right now is Apothecary Diaries. You guys should definitely fucking watch it if you're not already. Um, but the way I found Apothecary Diaries is that somehow in my YouTube autoplay, the OP for Apothecary Diaries got mixed in there. And if you've heard the OP1 for Apothecary Diaries, that song goes crazy hard, bro. It goes crazy hard. I heard that song and I was like, I don't give a fuck what this anime is. I'm watching it. I don't care like what the fuck it is. Like I have to know like what kind of show has that energy. And then I watched it and it's an absolute banger. The OP one for Apothecary Diaries is like, oh, it's a goat, bro. This is the goat. When we went to Japan in October, that song was playing at restaurants and shops everywhere. That's crazy. You know what's actually been playing at restaurants and shops here everywhere is fucking K-pop Demon Hunters. Actually, I feel like K-pop Demon Hunters has become inescapable here. Everywhere I go, I hear Golden. It's it's just pretty crazy. It's crazy. Speaking of which, I was at a Pilates class with my girl the other day, and I was super shocked because during like the warm ups where we're just doing some stretches and stuff, they were playing Lumiere from Expedition 33, and I was like. You gotta understand, right? Like I'm probably like at least I thought I was like the only like maybe like weeb nerd. I don't know what you'd call it, but like I like I like spring up and I'm looking around chat and I'm like Claire Obscure? I like say it out loud and like everyone just kind of looks at me and no one knows what the fuck I'm talking about. So I'm like, how did it get on the playlist? And then I asked the instructor afterward, and she said that her boyfriend had been playing Expedition 33, and she heard Lumiere and she liked the song so much that she put it in her playlist for her workouts. And so that's why and that's why it was in there. And so, yeah, funny story. I heard Lumiere during a Pilates class, and it freaked me the fuck out. I thought I was going insane because it starts out with like, them being okay, like lie down, take a deep breath, and all I hear is deem dum. I'm like, wait. I'm like, hold the fuck up. Hold up. Interesting. Interesting. I thought my brain was melting for a second. I was like, wait, this isn't supposed to happen here. I wish I was still watching anime, but God, I forget how many years ago now. But I remember shifting more and more to just reading manga and seeing as most anime are just manga adaptations these days. I just couldn't stand the pacing of some shows and how they were adapting stuff, or the wait between seasons and potential wrecks, train wrecks like One Punch Man. So yeah, manga. No, I get it. I get it. And then also like the amount of filler that can get added, and um, yeah, it can be unfortunate sometimes with anime adaptations and what they do to just kind of ruin a manga. And then um also just the fact that they turn everything into a fucking movie nowadays. And not to say that all the movies are bad, it's just that like they milk shit a little too much. Do what happened to the trail streams? Okay, so I actually do want to talk about that before we get into the the main topic of today's discussion, the trail streams. Okay, so I have not stopped playing Trails. I'm on the final chapter right now. Um, the only thing is that I just feel like my streaming schedule gets too inconsistent for me to play ultra long games like that. And then I had also stopped because I was having a bit of back pain for a while, which isn't really a big problem at the moment. But that being said, um, yeah, I just feel like my streaming schedule was too inconsistent. So I'll probably stream the final boss, but I'll just play up to that point and then I'll beat it on stream so that you guys don't have to sit through very inconsistent NSP stream scheduling. And obviously, or maybe not as obvious to some, why my stream schedule and why me streaming is so inconsistent is because I'm not just a streamer. I also make YouTube videos and shorts and a number of other things, which I try to stream Mondays and Fridays now. I've been semi-consistent. We do have to skip some Mondays and some Fridays. But typically when we're skipping, it's because I'm working on something really, really crucial for the channel. And I'd rather get that out than do another stream. And that's just usually what it is. So, are you going to play Final Fantasy Tactics after Trails? Yes, Final Fantasy Tactics is on my list for to complete this year. If so, please stream that. Yeah, it's hard because anything that goes on longer than 30 hours probably gets like really complicated to stream, because I can stream maybe 3 to 5 hours a day, or maybe 3 to 5 hours per session, which it basically means that at max I can do 10 hours per week. But it's usually closer to 3.5 to 4 hours. So it gets really difficult to stream whole modern JRPGs, because most modern JRPGs are 50 plus hours, right? So it ends up taking like an extremely long time to do those types of streams, which is fine to a degree. But then again, when I have to stop and make videos, and then I'm trying to I have certain deadlines that I have to kind of meet to upload stuff, and gets complicated. So we'll see. I think I do want to stream Tactics. Tactics is one of the only major Final Fantasy games I have never played. And I don't know how. How long is Tactics? 40 hours. Fuck. And then 52 hours if you do some side content alongside that. Okay. Really like the Versus 13 video. Thank you. Thank you. That's also another thing I want to talk about real quick before we get into today's news, is that video. Thank you guys so much for like really enjoying that one. This year is kind of the year of Final Fantasy 15 again for me, because it is the 10th anniversary of Final Fantasy 15, and Final Fantasy 15 is basically how we began this journey. And so this will be my 9th year of creating content, but it'll be the 10th anniversary of Final Fantasy 15's release. Actually, well, yeah, because I started making content in March 2017. So it was shortly after FF15's release. And I started the channel to cover FF15's post-launch because it was so fascinating and there was so much stuff to talk about. So I kind of want to tie in basically like leading into the channel's 10th anniversary and leading into FF15's 10th anniversary. That basically I'll look back on Final Fantasy 15. And I wanted to start with that Versus 13 video. And then eventually, because this is really easy to do on stream, I do want to stream Final Fantasy 15 and do a more thorough playthrough. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this, but I want to be able to try to make a charitable take on the battle system. That doesn't mean I won't criticize it, but I want to try to find like that doesn't mean I'm going in trying to be like, yeah, this is good, even if it's ass. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that like, I want to try to understand what the fuck they were thinking when they made it. And try to like come out with like an angle about like try to like see if there is an angle where that battle system actually is good and does excel. You know what I'm saying? Clearly there has to be something good in it. There has to be something good in it. Again, I get it, you're trying to find the nuance in the system. Right. I think it's like Final Fantasy 13's like battle system. If you look at 13's battle system on the surface, it can be bad to a lot of people, but I think if you dig into Final Fantasy 13's battle system and understand like what it is, you can kind of find like a lot of enjoyment in it. And I think the boss fights are really where it gets exceptional. I think this is also true of Final Fantasy 12 as well. So I basically just want to present all sides of that battle system if I possibly can, and understand what the devs actually wanted to fucking do with it. Because yeah, we're curious your thoughts on Trails and plans for any videos around it. I know the battle system has hooked you, but yeah, I've seen a few videos of first timers to the series and their thoughts after playing FC. Just fun to watch, really. Yes, there will be an essay on FC after I finish it. And that will probably come, honestly, probably closer to next month. Although I'll probably beat it like next week, I think. Maybe. But yeah, that'll probably drop like next month, I think. I'm going to try to do an essay on each one. You make a good point for 13, but 12 is a tough one for me to like. Yeah. I mean... To be entirely clear, yes, my position is that 13's battle... I mean, not 13. Sorry. 13 does have a good battle system. It just has bad combat design in many places. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but if I were to explain what I mean by that, is that 13's battle system, the system itself is good. It's just that a lot of the regular enemies that you fight in the game take an absurdly long time, even if you're min-maxing the fights and getting 5 stars. It's like this still takes too long to do. Like the whole process of going into a battle and out of a battle is like really lengthy, and they made faster paced battles, but the pacing of the battle feels faster, but like the actual length of the battle is longer, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, with 15, I think it's really easy to just go down the list and talk about how bad that game's combat is. um, but again, when I do go back and look at it, obviously I will talk about the criticisms of it, but I just want to like play it and see if I can actually find good in that combat system. There has to be something. There has to be something. So I think when we go back and we try to present that battle system in its totality, I think maybe we'll find like it's not that well, it is kind of that bad, but it's not it's not all bad, let's say. Um I doubt we can expect much from SE's anniversary, SE with 15's anniversary. Didn't they recently close down its Twitter? Yeah, they did. I don't expect a 15 remaster or anything like that. I don't expect anything to happen with 15. The closest thing that will happen to 15 is Verum Rex. And Verum Rex is, by design, meant to be an antithesis to everything 15 stood for. So the final game of 15, I think, is pretty much done. You can already play it on Steam and current gen PlayStation and Xbox. The only thing you can't play it on is Switch 2, I mean. I think it'd be really interesting if they bought 15 to Switch 2. And that's about it. 13 has brilliant boss fights, but regular mobs can be fine to way too much HP, annoying mechanics, behemoths, for example. But a great way to look at 13's battle system in your limited control is more like an RTS game or calling the shots in a raid. I saw it described as once. It really does feel like that. Yeah, for sure. I would agree with that statement. 100%. The problem I have with 15's combat is that I never go into a flow state with it. Like, there is never a point where I feel like I'm doing, like, really good, but I'm also never dying or doing really bad. You just kind of, like, go between these weird states of defense and offense, and it never feels good. And it just, like, yeah, it's just like this really crappy kind of non-flow that happens. You can't really flow in 15. Yeah, there is no flow. There is never like a moment where you feel like you never feel like you're comboing. You never feel like the enemy design is exceptionally good. It's also weird because, again, yeah, you can hold like you can hold the defense button and essentially be immortal to an extent, except for some attacks where they want you to roll, they want you to dodge roll, but they don't indicate which attacks those are. You just have to fucking figure it out, and it doesn't, there's no indication. It doesn't tell you anything. FF15 enemies had no telegraphs. Yeah, that's another thing too, is that there's no telegraphs in the entire game. And I feel like I read an interview, and it's always hard to find interviews from like 10 plus years ago. You guys know this, but if anyone knows the interview that I am hallucinating this from, it may be entirely fake, apparently, because I don't know if I read it or not. because I can't find it again. But from what I remember Tabata saying is that he didn't feel like enemy telegraphs were realistic, which I vehemently fucking disagree with. This is like this is like the basis of like all things that move have telegraphs in real life. Everything in real life has telegraphs. Like animals in that is a real interview. Okay, yeah. Animals in the animal kingdom absolutely do have telegraphs. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's like not true. That's not true at all. There are definitely telegraphs in nature. But also, who gives a shit if there are no telegraphs in like in real people or in real animals? Just make it fucking fun. Also, who cares about realism? Make it fun. Dude, you have to understand that Luminous Productions and Tabata removed the fucking double jump button because they said that double jump wasn't realistic. So that's also kind of. Anyways, I'm gonna fuck around and get harassed by Barry because Barry apparently does watch our streams. And he was mad at me the other day about some incomprehensible whatever I did. Oh, I know what I did. I released a versus video. That's probably set him off. Those who know. If you don't know, be glad that you don't know. Okay, let's shout out to Shinra Archaeology Department as always for making it super easy for us to get a hold of all of the interviews here. So, when asked if any character had grown on him more deeply through the remake process, Hamaguchi-san highlighted Barrett Wallace as a standout. So, as a creator, all of the characters are special to me, he said, before focusing on one in particular. But in terms of the remake series, introducing new facets of the characters to sort of pull the viewers in, for me, it is Barrett. He explained how limitations shaped the original portrayal. So in the original FF7, Barrett was a product of the time, very contemporary, and it was very cookie cutter. Actually, I don't know if I agree with that. There were limits to what they could do with the character. With modern technology and storytelling tools, those restrictions no longer applied. But currently, with the new Barrett, the Barrett in FF7 Rebirth, we were able to showcase more of Barrett's character, personality, and the sort of justice he seeks, and the things he wants to protect. I actually really agree with that part, though. Hamaguchi-san also highlighted how Barrett's role against Fate became more clear in Remake. Barrett stood against Fate with the other characters in the new remake. The fan response confirmed that effort, so even after Rebirth went on sale, there were a lot of positive comments from fans about Barrett and his development, and I was very, very glad to receive those comments. A very interesting statement. Bro, you got the most niche haters. That's so fucking true. That is so fucking true. Oh, God. That's so true. There is like... There's no normal NSP hater, I think. Because, like, if you just talk to me, I'll always have a conversation. And you can always just, like, say, hey, I respectfully disagree with you. And I'm just like, that's cool. You have, like, your reasons, and if they seem like really well like articulated, I'll just be like, that's fine. Hey, you know, you do you. Or if you challenge me in a good way, I'll just say, hey, like there's something to your point. But yeah, it is really crazy because people will try to like be aggressive, and I'm just like, damn, dude, there's like literally no reason to ever be aggressive with me of all people, because if you just talk to me, I'm just like, yeah, that seems like a fair point. Anyway, talking about Barrett in Retrilogy. I do think that Retrilogy has just basically done the best job with the characters in this game. I feel like Barrett really, one of the things about Barrett in Retrilogy that I think was really elevated is that you can tell why people would follow Barrett in Retrilogy in a way I don't think the original game gets across as strongly as Retrilogy does, where it is very much communicated to me how much of a charismatic, uplifting man he is. And I think he is that in OG as well. I just think that it is just so apparent, though, overwhelmingly apparent in the remake games. And a lot of that is due to, the amazing voice acting from John Eric Bentley, who I think just does a phenomenal job. There is like, I feel like he has just been the best casting for that character humanly possible. Like, just the fucking best. And so, yeah, he is definitely the GOAT. I recently played the original in Japanese, and I think it's easier to feel that in Japanese than our original translation. So a lot of remake stuff feels closer to the original Japanese than the original English. That makes sense. I need to do I want to do like a Japanese run of Final Fantasy games, because Final Fantasy games generally are easy-ish to understand. At least if you play like the Famicom and Super Famicom games, then they're super easy to understand. So yeah, I do think that Barrett was great. I don't know if I agree with the line about him being cookie cutter for the time, because I felt like Barrett was kind of one of the more groundbreaking characters in OG Final Fantasy VII. So I don't know if I agree with Hamaguchi's take on that. I do agree that he was a product of the time and very contemporary, because he's definitely based on like Mr. T and kind of like a 90s interpretation of that type of black man, which is not necessarily bad, but it definitely was just, as he says, kind of a product of the time. And I think they did kind of deepen his character a lot in the Retrilogy games. And I think they just made him really exceptional overall. So what I am curious is about like what he means here is how he highlighted Barrett's role against Fate and how that became clear in the remake, because Fate has two different nuances now with regards to this trilogy. And I am kind of curious on clarification of necessarily what that means, because I actually don't know. Like, I think he means, in this context, his fight against Fate in a societal and socioeconomic position, rather than like the arbiters of fate, ordained destiny type Fate. But it could kind of go either way, because we do have this scene where Barrett gets stabbed in Shinra HQ. Spoilers. So, have you watched Sky's second chapter remake trailer yet? The game has been officially announced for fall 2026. Roy Mustang, thank you so much for the super chat. I have not watched the trailer because I'm afraid of spoilers, as I'm on the final chapter for the game. My essay for Trails in the Sky will be coming in the next few weeks, so I do hope you look forward to it. Again, Roy Mustang, thank you so much for this super chat. Yeah, so my assumption is that he means Barrett's like socioeconomic fate, and not his like Whispers Planet Fate. Because clearly that wasn't a thing in the OG, and I don't think you can make something clear that wasn't in like the first game. What was... I was going to read something that I thought I saw. Also, hello, Subtext. What's up, bro? I've watched the video twice now and never noticed the fate part of the answer. Maybe a subtle translation thing. Oh, yeah, this is from a video, isn't it? Well, I'm going to just read the thing because it's easier to do than kind of react to a video. Well, I mean, I guess reacting to a video is probably easier, but is the video in English subtitles? I don't know. With Final Fantasy VII spanning numerous spin-off and timelines, we asked whether those existing stories imposed creative limitations. Hamaguchi-san framed the project as something broader than a simple remake. So it's not from the perspective solely of making the remake, but the remake project as a whole, he explained. Even the members of such as creative director Nomura Tetsuya and producer Kitase, they didn't just want to make a remake. They wanted to make a story that could include the compilation of the spin-offs and the soul that they have birthed across the years into the project and bring a fresh feel to FF7. Yeah, it has English subtitles. Okay. Well, if it has English subtitles, then I guess we're just better off just reading this then, because we have to read either way. So this is interesting, right? Because a lot of the times what gets talked about is if they had certain limitations on things that they wanted to depict in the original that they couldn't do because of technology, and if the remake games are now allowing them to do that. And they're saying that they wanted to make a story that could include the compilation of the spin-offs and the soul of it, that they have birthed across the years into this project and bring a new feel to FF7. So I don't really know if, limitations and things that they couldn't do, whether that is necessarily super important for justifying whether certain ideas are good or bad, like the arbiters or like whatever they're doing there, or anything like that. I mean, FF7 was an incredibly ambitious game, and any game that's that ambitious is definitely going to have just concepts that don't make it in, and things that are just way out of the scope. And a lot of those things got expanded in the compilation for sure. And this is something that, as I kind of, have been doing like deep dives on like more niche Final Fantasy topics, like looking into like the kind of things that say like in Final Fantasy X's development, where they basically always wanted Yuna to be an idol, and they wanted her to sing and dance, and there was supposed to be a Makalania music festival where, and I shit you not, this is in like the Final Fantasy X Ultimania Omega, they talk about how Yuna was going to wear Yunalesca's like attire, and she was going to sing and dance in Makalania. And that was like the original plan. And then obviously, well, they felt like tonally that didn't fucking make sense for like the kind of more serious story that they wanted to tell with Final Fantasy X. So they cut it down, and it really just became Yuna doing the sending dances instead of her singing and doing all of that stuff. So they cut the idol stuff, right? But then when Final Fantasy X-2 came around, her being an idol and her singing and stuff like that came back into play. Granted, there's also people that hate her being an idol entirely. I actually like that aspect of Yuna. I think that was like one of the more solid things that 10-2 brought to the table. I think it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever watched FF Union's video on Zack, but Nojima and Nomina were wanting to use him more since the OG, but weren't able to. They had a lot of stuff written. Yeah, so, I mean, the thing about Zack is that Zack came into development like super late. Like super late. And the original Final Fantasy VII released in Japan didn't even like have the scene inside the Nibelheim mansion that you can go and see, where like you really find out, you know, everything about Zack, or, you know, how things kind of transpired that later gets expanded more in Crisis Core. And so, yeah, Zack was a very, very, very last minute thing for them. And I think that was kind of the motivation for them to make Crisis Core in the first place, because they kind of just knew that Cloud wasn't in Soldier, and he was, I don't want to say lying, but you know what I mean. His memories weren't correct, and so he was kind of telling a false interpretation of events. And they really didn't know what the fuck they wanted to do. And kind of like, I think it was in like the last 6 months of development or something crazy late like that, they were like, I got it. We'll come up with this guy named Zack, and that'll fill in like, that'll fill in the gap for like all this stuff. And so, yeah, he came into development like super, super, super late to essentially be the final piece of Cloud's backstory. I'm almost at the end of Final Fantasy X and paused it twice. I've heard spoilers about the ending and still confused how it goes. When you get there, you'll understand. It's one of the best endings, I think, in like RPGs and like video games. It's a really damn good ending. And then when you play 10-2, you'll further understand why things are like that. Weren't some of the Zack scenes only added in FF7 International along with some of the weapon fights? I think a lot of the Western fans don't realize the version of FF7 we got was the improved FF7 International version from Japan. Yeah. So, yeah, basically like the optional Zack scene that you can unlock, that basically was not in the first version of Final Fantasy VII released in Japan. It was only in the international version. So the version that we got here in the West, that they basically made it for that. They included it with that. And then they re-released the version that we got in Japan, and it was called Final Fantasy VII International. And so basically we got the final mix version of Final Fantasy VII when it launched. But a lot of the content that we got in our first Final Fantasy VII release was not available in the first release that happened in Japan. So, and that used to be the cool thing about like the release gap between the Japanese version and the Western version, is that essentially after the Japanese version launched and they were working on the localization, the team would continue to make content for the game while they were working on it. And so we would always get a version of the Final Fantasy games that were better than the initial Japanese version, because they usually had more content and a lot of fixed features that the initial Japanese version didn't have. And then they would relaunch it in Japan and they would call it Final Fantasy International. And that would be like a better version of the same game that included all the updates that the localizations had. So, fun FF history for those who are not aware. Same with Kingdom Hearts -2, which added more, much more than BBS and KH1. Yeah. Remember 10-2 international was Japan only? Yeah, some of the international stuff, like they would add even more content back when they re-released it in Japan than the Western versions. So you would get stuff like 10-2 International, which had even more content, plus the stuff that they added for the Western version. And so, yeah. Um, while the quality of games from that Square era was incredible, the way things were being released kind of sucked because there was a ton of things where it was like, yeah, this is Japan only, and we just would not get it. And now that's not the case. Everything comes out on the same day for everybody. And that's awesome. Although it does suck probably for Japanese people because they probably don't get the games on the first day. Stefan, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. Glad you like the hair. Anyway, so this one's about mini games. Rebirth's extensive selection of minigames has been a frequent topic of discussion. Yeah, it sure as fuck has. So we asked Hamaguchi-san's views, how Hamaguchi-san views their role within the overall experience. He was quick to frame the issue as an industry-wide challenge rather than something unique to Rebirth. And I think I agree with that. So that's not a unique problem for Rebirth only, he said. A lot of games, aside from the main game and this main story progression, also have the side games and the mini games built into them. According to Hamaguchi, pacing was the key concern. So when you're playing the game and you're going through the main story progression, as well as the intended game design, you tend to fall into this trap of having the same tempo. So you tend to get bored of it. To counter that, the team deliberately introduced variety. So to sort of combat this and keep that fresh feeling of going through the game, that's why we introduced these mini games to add to sort of add a diversity of experience as you're playing the game to keep up a good rhythm, so to say. He acknowledged that not all players respond the same way. So we understand when you introduce these different facets into the game, some people would play it and really enjoy it, but some people would rather just get on with the main story. Still, he emphasized that this balance was carefully considered. So it's a sort of calculated move on our part to include all of these different facets of the game. Hamaguchi-san also pointed to legacy as a guiding factor. So the original FF7 had lots of minigames and was very famous for that. Preserving that diversity felt essential when approaching the remake. That is really true. Whenever people say that Rebirth has super annoying game design that forces you to do a minigame like every few seconds, that's kind of what the original Final Fantasy VII is like too. And a lot of them aren't fully fleshed out mini games. They're just kind of like one-time things you do, like say in like the Mako reactor where everyone has to hit the button at the same time. But Final Fantasy VII was loaded with mini games, and I think like every hour or two you're running into some type of new mini game or some type of gameplay mix-up that is different from the last thing that you're doing. I would go as far as saying that FF7 is kind of the master of gameplay variety. There is so much different shit stacked back to back to back in that game, and you are constantly doing a different thing than the last thing you were doing. I understand that for a lot of people that is annoying. I get it. But that is kind of true to the FF7 essence, is that you were always doing a very different thing. I don't think that Rebirth actually has that many mandatory minigames. Whenever people say that the game had a bunch of mandatory minigames, I think that they're talking about it from a platinum perspective. And I don't know if you can really judge the game from the perspective of the platinum when you say forced minigames. I don't think that Rebirth's main story, if you beeline it, has more forced minigames than the OG does. I think they have about the same amount of forced minigames. And most of the forced minigames, quote unquote, are really just easy to do. They're not terribly hard. You can get through them really fast. I think other than, yes, I agree. Other than Kate Sith's mission, which most of us agree was a not that bad, but it just goes on for too goddamn long. I don't think there were that many forced mini games when you play the main story. Even the Queen's Blood tournament can be entirely fucking skipped. You do not have to do it. You can literally just skip through it. Although, why would you? Queen's Blood is amazing. Did you have a favorite minigame? Queen's Blood. The minigames in OG FF7 are fast, over, and done with, and then you can ignore them. Rebirths by and far were okay to shit. Queen's Blood is the exception. They also lock story stuff behind minigames like the weird Wade and Avalanche stuff. Or the entire Wedge, I think. Weird Wedge and Avalanche stuff, or the Gilgamesh quest, yeah. That's fair. Like I said, it depends on the perspective of that you're looking at it at. I think that the mini games become a problem if you plan on platinuming the game. Then I think it's like a fair criticism that your enjoyment of the game was thoroughly disrupted by the number of mini games that you had to do. I guess because I don't tend to look at things from a completionist perspective, that I'm able to forgive stuff that's optional a lot easier than people who are completionists. That being said, I can't say that like one is more valid than the other, because if you play video games for that purpose, to enjoy all the content, I think that's a very valid way to experience anything, because you are experiencing it holistically. But I just personally find no matter what the game is, at some point in time, anytime I'm trying to be a completionist about it, something about the game is always going to make me do some shit that I just fucking hate. And it's usually going to make me do it for fucking hours in order to get a trophy. And typically I just am like, why the fuck am I doing this? And I stop. And I know that's like not like the popular thing, because people love the idea of like going through and getting the platinum and completely conquering the game. But I just feel like a lot of times with a lot of games, especially like a lot of modern games, it's just like most of the time I'm hating every second of like, or not every second, but like I'm hating just doing like a lot of things that they arbitrarily said you should do this because we made the content and we wanted a really big video game. And yeah, I think that like what they probably should have done for Rebirth, and like what they should do going forward, is rather than having like a crap ton of mini games, I think that there should be like a very, very small selection of mini games. But I think that they should all be like incredibly fucking well designed. Right? So if this was Final Fantasy 17 and we didn't have to like stick to like the FF7 spirit of things, then I think it would be awesome if you had like something like Queen's Blood and maybe just like 2 or 3 other mini games, and they were all like really deep and had a lot to them, and then that would be it. So anything not bound to FF7 going forward, that's how I would like to see it approached, and I think people would actually value that a lot more. Whenever it was as well thought out and as central as Queen's Blood was, everyone fucking loved it. But whenever it wasn't, that's when people kind of got like, okay, why do I have to do like all of this bullshit? I think at the end of the day, and I would like to think that most of you would agree, that Final Fantasy is better with mini games than without them. I do think that gameplay variety is better being there than it not being there. Because especially when I play something like Final Fantasy 16, for example, and there is absolutely nothing outside of the same combat progression every single fight, stagger the enemy, dump cooldowns, and that is kind of just the game. Of course, yeah, sure, you can mix and match your combos in order to do that in whatever way you find personally satisfying. But literally, that's going to be every fight and every single thing that you do in that game. So, excuse me. At the end of the day, I would rather have some type of gameplay diversity than none. Even if sometimes I hate that variety, then not. Here comes the 16 slander. It wouldn't be an NSP stream without it. But I agree though. Okay, good deal. I mean, 16 was just kind of like, it was the polar opposite of Rebirth, right? In that way, and in most ways. So I think that there is a balance between the two, though, that would probably be good. You're describing 16 and that worked fine? I'm sure it worked fine for somebody, for some people. I'm sure some people thought that worked fine. I do imagine that regardless, there will probably be less focus on minigames in Part 3 because of the tone of the game. Part 3 will be far more story and drama. The point of Rebirth, for better or worse, was creating fun opportunities for Bond through doing a fuck ton of stuff in the world and with the characters. There will be mini games, but a giant meteor falling towards the planet will have some impact on how, when, / how many mini games they serve up. I agree. I completely agree. I think that older Final Fantasy games also balanced the side content a lot better too, just like in general, because for most of the Final Fantasy games previous, like it would essentially do a formula where you would get to kind of like the point of no return, and right before that point, the whole world kind of opened up to you and you were able to go back and you were able to find different mini games and you were able to do different side content, and it was really interesting. So what those games would do is they would offer you the ability where you could go spend 100 hours and become a god and then go and fight the final boss and just one-shot them, right? Or you could just go straight to the final boss, who is mostly balanced for you doing a little bit of side content, but not being like super overpowered, right? So you were able to set the pacing at that point of, do you want to dive into all the side content and make this world last a little bit longer? Or do you want to just go straight to the final boss? And that's also one of the things that that Expedition 33 kind of brought back. That's what E33 did, and people still complained about Act 3 pacing. I think that they did because most people played it like completely opposite of me. I actually went straight for the final boss, and then I went and did all the other shit. But everybody else, it's like they went and did 100% everything. But I was like, I need to see what the end of this shit is. I don't think that they need to. I just think that they need to just have like a better filter on what mini games that they put in, and just be more selective. But I think that we shouldn't send the wrong message, right? because fans have been begging for the return of mini games for like 2 decades. They're like, Final Fantasy games don't have like fun mini games anymore like they used to in the PS1 and PS2 era. So like, when are you guys bringing like, that type of content back? And people bitched and bitched and bitched about this for like a really, really long time. And we finally got that shit back. And I don't want the message to be that they should go away. But also, I think that mini games were just a way to solve a problem. And the problem is that, or the issue that people were having with a lot of the modern FF games were that they were kind of monotonous in the way that you play them, right? So there's not really a gameplay mix-up that happens in Final Fantasy 13 or say Final Fantasy 16. 15 does have like some stuff that adds variety, but like 13 and 16 don't really do that. 13 didn't really get mix-ups until 13.2, and then that's when like the gameplay had like a ton of different things that you can kind of do, and it would kind of mix up the pacing a lot, and it had towns and stuff. This is also the reason why people really actually lament towns not being a thing in 13. It's not so much that like, hey, what the fuck, there's no towns. I mean, to some degree, yeah, there's no fucking towns, and it's a Final Fantasy game, and that does suck. But really, what people were missing when there were no towns is that they were missing how the gameplay pacing and story pacing changed when you arrived in a town. Things would slow down. They would become more exploration driven and less combat driven. You wouldn't be thinking about fighting enemies or grinding or anything like that, but you'd go around, you'd explore shops. It would be more focused on setting the narrative up for the next act, which would then lead into a dungeon, etc., right? And that typically was the way those things were structured. And the problem that people ran into with Final Fantasy 13 and why that just manifested as lol, no towns, is because there wasn't really points like that in Final Fantasy 13. And if there were, they lasted really, really shortly and they weren't really well done, right? So, I think it's called the Nautilus, like the golden saucer-like area in Final Fantasy 13 that you go to. And there's like a quick mini game where you find chocobos, chicks, and it's like, okay. Um, it's not like super deep or anything. And that was kind of the gameplay mix-up. And there was nothing else aside from that. There was no clever moment. You know how Wall Market is kind of fun, even though technically in Wall Market you're just kind of like going around pushing different dialogue options. But there's also like, there's also squats that you're doing. There's also different gameplay mix-ups that you're doing. And so that ends up being why towns missing in Final Fantasy 13 felt like such a crucially missing piece of FF13's game design. A series that is a great example of pacing the game and the minigame so that neither feel like they impose on the other? Zelda. Yeah, actually, I really agree with that. Since A Link to the Past, really, but definitely Ocarina of Time onwards, that's how you put minigames in. No, yeah, I completely agree with that, Crossy. That's actually a really good example. Is that Zelda actually has been pretty good at that. At just introducing new gameplay variety in general as you go along. I think that there is a way to do it through combat alone. So like if you look at like Kingdom Hearts 2, for example, and again, this is why I think that like say 16 didn't necessarily have to have mini games, but it could have easily looked at how Kingdom Hearts 2 mixes up gameplay through just sheer like combat scenario design, and how every single fight in Kingdom Hearts 2 is such a unique and interesting fight, especially on critical mode, that it doesn't need mini games or something else like that, because it has variety built into the system and built into the encounters, and so it feels like you are fighting a very different thing every time you go into combat, right? I mean, every single boss is just super unique. in how it challenges the player, from the data fights to the boss fights that happen in the main game. All of the fights, optional and main story, are very unique and just very different ways of mixing things up, and it's cool. It's also a lot shorter too, which helps, both from the development perspective, where they can really focus on those moments, and also from the player's perspective too, where they're not trapped doing things for a really long time and the pacing begins to drag on them. So I'll just drag this up here and do it like that. Okay, remaking Final Fantasy VI. Hold on one second. Mama knows. Okay. We asked Hamaguchi about a comment he made earlier this year regarding remaking Final Fantasy VI and whether any elements from that title influenced his work on Final Fantasy VII Remake series. He shared, quote, "So because I played the original Final Fantasy VI as a kid, and it was sort of one of the roots of me as a gamer, now as a game creator making titles, you can sort of see how that comes through in the work I produce." He continued to explain, while producing the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, the team had to remain faithful to the original Final Fantasy VII story, though they added new parts to enhance the experience. So, in that respect, we are keeping to the FF7 script, and there was no conscious incorporation of FF6 or special bits into the new series, he clarified. I don't know anyone thought that like FF6 would like be a big influence on Final Fantasy VII Remake. I mean, FF6 had already kind of influenced Final Fantasy VII in general, such that I don't think that FF6 needed to really have a big impact on the remake series. I mean, what else is there to say than that? However, there is part of this quote that people have been talking about online, and that is the part where they say, "We are keeping to the FF7 script." Okay. That part made people like, aha, it is a remake. It's not a sequel. And that type of conversation. First of all, can I just say that it's like really strange that this is like a debate now? Because I remember back in 2020 where every single person was like, it's not a remake, it's a sequel. And now this is like this like huge debate that I keep seeing on social media where it is a remake or it is actually a sequel. And this is the thing that I'm neither here nor there with. Like, I don't really care at this point, like, whether it is meant to be a sequel or whether it is meant to be a remake. If you do ask me which one I think it is, like, I do think that, like, it probably is the thing that we thought it all was, where it's like a requel. To me, that does seem to be, like, again, just observationally, from everything that has been said in the game and what the game itself seems to be communicating, it does seem to be communicating that it is trying to be a remake and a sequel. It is not like either one. They are sticking to the original Final Fantasy VII script, and they're also at the same time not sticking to that script. Yeah, so I see it as both. I see it as like the original Final Fantasy VII is in there, and a new story that was not part of the original Final Fantasy VII is not there, right? Like, I don't think you can just say that Sephiroth doing the Confluence of Worlds is just a remake, right? Like, that seems far-fetched to me. Like, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that there was this idea that the Confluence of Worlds was always a thing, that the Arbiters were always a thing, and the technology or whatever just wasn't ready enough to depict it. And that's not to say, whether it's like inherently good or bad because of that, but it is to say that it's very apparent that on top of retelling the original FF7 story, they are also trying to tell a brand new thing on top of that. And whether you interpret that as a sequel literally or not, it is absolutely thematically a sequel. It absolutely plays on the fact that Final Fantasy VII and you know how things go, and it plays with those expectations purposely, right? And that is something that the original game didn't do. So I think that there is plenty of room to argue whether you think it's a sequel or not, in terms of it literally being like a time travel sequel where Sephiroth and Aerith go into the past and like have like this big battle or whatever. But I do think it is harder to deny that it is thematically a sequel, where it is having an active conversation with the OG Final Fantasy VII and is trying to get you to think deeper about that game and its themes while revisiting them and elevating them. I also don't think that the developers themselves are as obsessed with the label of remake and sequel as we are. Right? Like, someone who's more well-versed in Evangelion lore, please correct me on this, but my understanding is that the term rebuild for the Eva films was kind of a fan invention, like a fan label, really, to kind of describe what was happening with those films, rather than something Ano and his team actually put out to like label those films, and it kind of took off. Like, that's like my understanding, right? I don't think that... Is it in the name of the new... Wait, it is in the name of the movies. But where did I hear that from then? Wait, yeah, Rebuild of Evangelion is the name of the film series. Okay, so then who fucking told me that? I don't know. Okay, I'm bullshitting. Anyways. I think people get way too caught up arguing over is it X or is it Y. It ultimately doesn't matter. But the reason so many for years said, hey, maybe play OG first to newcomers, is because even though the rework stands alone, they are absolutely baking on players knowing and being familiar with OG and compilation materials in this new story. In order for maximum effectiveness, yes, they are banking on it. So that is definitely a thing. And to me, that alone is what thematically makes it a sequel. Right? And not it literally being, you know what I'm saying? Oh, okay. I think... Yeah, so the name of the series itself is Rebuild of Evangelion, which is where that came from. So that makes sense. Because I was like, wait, the name of the films in general are not Rebuild of Evangelion. Kitase stated he was getting really into Rebuild of Evangelion while they were early in 7R's development. It's very obvious that Rebuild of Evangelion is what inspired not only 7 Remake, but also Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn, I think. I want to say, because Yoshi P is also super into Eva as well. So, we'll see. In either case, I don't think it fucking matters that much. I think fans are more obsessed with it, but I do think that the intent for this is to be a remake and a sequel-esque conclusion that incorporates the compilation of FF7 and everything FF7 into one place. The OG FF7 was heavily inspired by Ava, so it only makes sense. Yeah, it was. So, I mean, adds up to me. Reflecting on the scope of the project, we asked what lessons Hamaguchi learned from directing such a massive remake over nearly 10 years. Dude, that's just 10 years since release. You gotta remember, the remake project got greenlit in 2013. So really, they've already been working on this for 13 years almost. Maybe 14 if part 3 launches next year, right? So that's crazy. He says, first and foremost, not just limited to Square Enix, but even other companies undertaking such a big project, it requires a measure of resolve, he said. He emphasized that few studios could commit to a project of this scale, so it's very difficult to even propose a project of this scale. As the trilogy nears its conclusion, his focus has expanded beyond longtime fans. Now we're not just delivering this title to existing fan base of Final Fantasy VII, he explained. What we want to do now is also see how many new players we can deliver it to as an experience. Okay, pause. 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 With no disrespect to Hamaguchi whatsoever, I think Hamaguchi's a great guy. But I gotta fucking ask, why are we now thinking about how to deliver this to new players? Like with the upcoming release of the third part. You know what I'm saying? Like, why wasn't that part of the core foundation from the start? That is kind of I think that's been an issue for me since back in like 2020, where I was just like, where we're kind of headed with this does not really make it too favorable for new people to get into this. That being said, I do recommend the remake games as the starting point for people who are wanting to get into Final Fantasy. I always tell them just play Final Fantasy VII Remake. But I do think that it's super tough to just recommend it in general, knowing that a lot of that meta context does weigh heavily over the game. I think it can still be really enjoyed without it, but it does make it a lot harder for people. And if you look on the internet, people will actively dissuade you from playing 7R because they're like, no, you need to play OG first. You can't just go into 7R. I think that's tough. Did you ever see the interview between Nojima, Uematsu, and Nomura? And Nomura was like, I knew when I started this would take a long time. And he was like, I'm glad we are almost done because it's taken a long ass time. Oh my God. No, I did see that, but that's actually really fucking funny. And I completely understand and empathize with him. Everyone begged him for it. Everyone bitched the whole way. It is tough. Like, I do think that that's just such a tough thing to deal with. Anyway, going onward, he says, for Hamaguchi-san, a successful remake cannot be reduced to a formula. It's not on me to define what makes a good remake project, he said. Instead, he believes success comes from understanding the original strengths and building upon them. At the end of the day, what can we do to make players happy? That man Nomura is tired, bro. He's tired as fuck. He's so done. I like it though. I like that he's like barking back a little bit now that now that he's older. He doesn't give a fuck as much anymore. I think it's awesome. I think it's great, and I also think that it's like really cool that he's like kind of dedicating maybe this potentially last quarter of his career to just being like, I'm literally just going to do whatever the fuck I want, however the fuck I want it, and I am going to use company money to remind the company how they screwed me out of Final Fantasy Versus 13, and I'm going to turn every single project, the hundreds of projects that you guys get me to work on, I'm going to make sure that every single one of them are Final Fantasy Versus 13 from now on. I think that that is so goated. I fucking love that. I think that is like that is peak to me. I want him to be a salty bitch about it, dude. I want him to do that because they did fuck him out of that shit. They fucked the players out of it, and I think that he should, say, "Hey, that wasn't cool, dude. I'm gonna get my ideas out there because people have been waiting, like, you know, some people have been waiting, half their whole life to see some of this stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna put out fucking Virum Rex, and I'm gonna give the people what they've been waiting for. You can play 7R first and go back to play OG, or play OG first. I do think people want the full experience of this mystery box meta narrative influence narrative come part 3, though. You will need to have played both OG and Retrilogy, but they can't exactly say that in the marketing because it turned a lot of people away. Just look at Trails as an example of how prerequisites for a game is daunting to people. Yeah, that's a great point, Crossy. Because I would have gotten into Trails like a long time ago, personally. But the thing is that everyone was like, not before you do all the other homework that you have to do before you play that one Trails game that you're interested in. You need to go play all of these other games. And then I'm like, well, fuck. Okay. Then I just won't play it because that's just a lot. I just want to try the new one because I think the new one looks cool. And I know that like for like a lot of people, especially for Kingdom Hearts fans, they'll hate me saying this, but I think that like just play the game that you think is cool and interesting. And when you play it, just accept that you're not going to understand everything. I think most people understand coming into like a long running series that they won't understand everything, but you'll still have like a really good time and good experience. Like I think that if Kingdom Hearts 2, if you play Kingdom Hearts 2 and that's your first Kingdom Hearts game, not only do I think that through context clues you can understand 90% of the shit that's going on, I think that like also you will have such a good time playing Kingdom Hearts 2 that you will go play Kingdom Hearts 1 and Birth by Sleep and every other Kingdom Hearts game. So if you think Kingdom Hearts 2 looks kind of cool, then I think, yeah, hell yeah, you should just play Kingdom Hearts 2 and you'll probably be a Kingdom Hearts fan after that because you'll go back and play like every other Kingdom Hearts game. So God of War 2018, like if you think God of War 2018 is cool and you want to start with God of War 2018, which by the way, apparently by the numbers, most people did, because God of War 3 sold like 5 million and God of War 2018 sold 20 million, 25 million. So, or something like that. So God of War 2018, most people didn't play the original God of War trilogy that played 2018, right? So, but then, I'm sure like a decent number of people went back and learned about God of War through that. So my nephew right now is playing Final Fantasy VII Remake. And he's like, not only do I want to play Rebirth now, I want to go back and play the OG. So I think most people, let's be honest, I think that like, and this is something that commonly happens with fandom, is that fandom thinks that you need to play the thing in the way that they experienced it in order for you to have the same impact that they had, right? You have to experience it like they do in order for you to like the thing. And that's not true. This is always like, if people play the dub, then they're like, you need to play the dub or you need to play it in Japanese. Why? They can come up with a whole bunch of reasons, but really it boils down to I played it that way. So I need you to play it that way. Um, because if you play it that way, you'll get the same experience that I got and you'll feel the same way that I do, which isn't necessarily the case. Right? And so people are very insistent on that thing. The thing is that you got to let people play to their preference if you really want to get them interested in it, right? Like, so if they want to play it on the hardware they want to play it on, with the dub or the sub, if they want to play it, if they want to skip to like part 3 of something, because that was the part that interested them and got them into it. I think you should actually let them fucking do it. I think that is more likely to get them into the thing than you policing it and telling them that they have to go and do their homework and do it in order. And it has to be the way that you experienced it in order for them to enjoy it. It's so funny too, because as kids, this is the way that we all experienced media. Especially because for most of us, 20 plus years ago, shit was not as accessible as it is now. Right? Like you go back a decade or a decade before that, especially, and God forbid you go back a decade before that, like you couldn't just get into a thing from part 1. You couldn't just go on Netflix and say, I'm going to start this series at the first episode. You didn't really get into stuff linearly. Your first Metal Gear game was Metal Gear Solid 2 or 3. Your first Kingdom Hearts game was Kingdom Hearts 2. Or you saw Birth by Sleep and you had a PSP, and then Birth by Sleep was your first Kingdom Hearts game or something like that, right? Like, that is how it is for a lot of people. Like, a lot of people. Basically, nobody in the West played FF1 through 6 before 7. It was a lot lower, let's just say. Statistically speaking, yeah. Most people did not play the US versions of 2 and 3. Not nearly at the same way that they played Final Fantasy VII. FF7 was most people's main experience. And I guess with Final Fantasy, that's more fine than anything, but yeah, most people just don't, when they get into stuff, it's never because they started with the first thing. Starting with like the very first thing in the series is more of a modernity thing than it is a thing that people have historically done. So let's move on to the next one. This was just a fun one. So basically, the director of the Marvels says that Final Fantasy VII Advent Children was a huge influence for her, and I think we already got confirmation of this a while back, but she talked a little bit more about it on a Reddit AMA. So someone asked, if I'm remembering right, I read you got your inspiration for the fights in the Marvels from Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. Could you elaborate on that? Or correct me if I am wrong, and it was someone else, by the way. I thoroughly enjoyed the Marvels. She replied, I'm a big Final Fantasy girly, especially Final Fantasy VII, 10, and yes, 10 too. Bro, she chose the best ones. She chose the best ones. Advent Children was a huge movie for me, and that fight in the church between Tifa and Laws is fucking epic. I also loved at the end everyone throwing Cloud into the sky. Fuck physics. So true. So true. During early development of the Marvels, there is a fight scene in the core of a planet where the gravity keeps shifting, and I thought the way the church fight in that sequence at the end dealt with weightlessness was great. Very true. She knows ball, yeah. Yeah. For sure. First time I played FF7 was on a PSP because I was a broke 2000s kid. That's awesome as fuck, bro. I actually love that. Those pre-rendered backgrounds actually looks really amazing on PSP screen. Like it was like really well fitted for that screen. I remember like playing like FF7 and 8 on it, and I was like, dang, the pre-rendered backgrounds look so good on the PSP screen. PSP was such a cool console, man. And also, I'm gonna just say it. I miss video game consoles, like actual dedicated handhelds that were small and portable, and like you could actually like, you know what I'm saying, like really put them in your pocket or like stuff like that. I feel like even Switch is slightly too big for me. I think that portability like actually peaked with Game Boy Advance SP. I think that was actually like the peak handheld, and everything else was not the peak handheld. But like Game Boy Advance SP was just so like form fitted for your hand to be held, and like the battery life was amazing. And holy shit, dude. It was just like the perfect handheld console. The perfect size. It was just everything. And I think after that, the PSP was really cool. And I know like if you go on like Twitter, like you'll see like all of these like Nintendo fans that try to downplay PSP, and I'm just like PSP was actually better than DS. I'm sorry. Rix252, thank you so much for this super chat. Hey, love your content. Been watching since FF15. Oh, thanks, man. But I think the side content is a substitute to the old grinding in FF7. So I theorize it would make it hard since you'll be low level if you skipped. Um, I think you can beeline Rebirth actually pretty easily without doing like a tremendous amount of the side content. I actually like really love the way the level scaling works in Rebirth because it constantly keeps it so that you don't get too overpowered for where you are. However, you do have like a ton of flexibility in your build. So it is pretty cool. Um, that being said, thank you so much for the super chat, dude. Thanks for being there since FF15. Holy shit, that always means a lot for me. For everyone who's been here since that time. But yeah, I think that Game Boy Advance and PSP were like the peak for me. I think PSP is kind of like the peak of uh of just like the 2000s in general, like that era of tech. I just have such a fondness for it. And I also just think that like I don't know, man. I just felt like the PSP was way cooler to me than the DS. I spend a lot more time on the PSP, personally speaking. I just thought that the PSP games were cooler and more interesting, and the graphics were better. It's just a better time. I get why DS would be more popular, but I just didn't care for any of the DS's gimmicks, if I'm completely honest. I didn't give a fuck about the touchscreen. I didn't give a fuck about the microphone stuff. There's all these goddamn gimmicks on there, including the fact that the whole system is kind of based on like a two-screen gimmick. And some games used it well. Some games didn't really have a good use for it. But I just wanted like a traditional console experience on the go. I really didn't want any of like the Nintendo Waggle stuff. You know what I'm saying? Nintendo Waggle is like a Wii era like Nintendo insult, but yeah, I just didn't care about any of the fucking gimmicks that the DS had, but I just wanted game. DS did have cool games. It's not that it didn't have cool games. I just think that the PSP just had like more of a like core gaming experience that I wanted. And then I just linked this back to Okay. Let's talk about this. This was pretty interesting and caused a bit of discussion to happen over the weekend. So Genki had tweeted out, Final Fantasy VII Remake director Naoki Hamaguchi says newer employees at Square Enix now say that Final Fantasy XIII is their favorite game. Do you also have the fixed translation? Yeah. Genki posted it down below. So what was initially said that kind of caused this debate was, so recently, because the company has been growing and changing as new employees come in and the company just keeps going on, the younger folks who come in don't say Final Fantasy VI anymore. They say, oh yeah, Final Fantasy XIII was my favorite, so I really do feel the passing of the ages. Genki then said, I listened back and want to make a slight clarification to the video subtitles. Interviewer said he finds it interesting that a lot of game creators in Square Enix say FF6 is their favorite. Hamaguchi responded saying, but recently as newer people joined the company, lately younger employees are saying to him that they liked Final Fantasy XIII when they were kids, so he feels the passing of the ages. So this caused a lot of people to become hyped and a lot of people to doom. So a lot of people looked at this and they said, Final Fantasy 13 is so back, and they were like, but a lot of people were also like reaching levels of over previously thought impossible. So a lot of people fucking hated this. And a lot of people were like, this is the best thing ever, so we can publicly like Final Fantasy 13 again. So, the truth behind it is that that really isn't what he necessarily communicated. He just said that, hey, most people coming into Final Fantasy now are younger, or most of the employees coming into Final Fantasy now that are younger, they grew up playing Final Fantasy 13 now, and they didn't grow up playing Final Fantasy 6. And that makes perfect sense, because why would someone who's 20 years old have played Final Fantasy 6 from 1994, I think, when 6 came out? Was it 94? Something like that. They would have played Final Fantasy 13. They probably wouldn't have even played Final Fantasy 10, to be honest. Well, yeah, that's how time works. Yeah, basically. Basically. So it wasn't like this statement that I think a lot of people read it like, where it was just like, bro, everyone at the office fucking loves Final Fantasy 13. Which is the way it kind of got, unfortunately, interpreted as. It was just to say that, like, most of the newer people coming in have played Final Fantasy 13 growing up, And it might be their favorite Final Fantasy. It might be, like, one of the few Final Fantasies they've played. But, yeah, just not, like, what he's saying in quite the same way. I mean, younger fans do play the older games, but that doesn't mean they'll be their favorite, right? But also, too, it doesn't mean that newer games are either. It's just like, as he says here, that, that they played 13 when they were kids. And basically, if you played 13 when you were a kid, you're pretty fucking young. Of course, I don't think that they hate 13. I don't know if it's their favorite or not their favorite. It just carries a very different nuance than, like, most people's favorite now is 13 in the office. Which is like the way it kind of read the first time. So I don't think that, like, if you're a 13 fan or a 13 hater, that this should be read as like everything is 13 now. Or like, actually this quote means that nobody likes 13. It was just that they grew up with it or whatever the fuck. It basically just means that like time has shifted and most of the people that are like most of the people that are like Gen Z, younger Gen Z, grew up playing 13 because that's the game that released when they were younger. It doesn't really say anything like positive or negative. Uh, that yeah, exactly. He's just saying he's getting old. Yeah, that's literally all it says. It's not a positive or negative thing about 13. It's just to say, bro, I'm fucking old. That's really what it says. So I think everyone, kind of had their narrative about it, but yeah. And it also, because I was like reading the Reddit thread on this, I thought it was really interesting because I see this all the time. And I want to know if chat kind of knows where this comes from. It's this comment right here. I mean, FF13 also just very popular in Japan. It does decent in polls and Lightning does extremely well. The backlash to it is really only a Western thing. I see this said all the time. Does anyone have anything that actually suggests this? Because I've never actually have had this. So I went and looked up the NHK polls. And Final Fantasy XIII ranks number 14. It is actually the second lowest ranking, third lowest ranking mainline title. Wait, no, fourth, because Final Fantasy Final Fantasy the first game and then Final Fantasy 2 are down here in 18. But yeah, it ranks number 14. Sorry, let me move myself. So Final Fantasy X ranks number 1, 7 is number 2, then 6, 9, 14. So I've never found anything that suggests that the reception in Japan was profoundly different than the West. If anything, I've only ever found evidence that it was also divisive in Japan. 14th being 5th is just crazy. Yeah, it is crazy how 14 is just... I mean, 14 is really popular in Japan because, they also had like the 14 cafes and such. So, but this poll is a few years old by now, and so 16 isn't on here. I would be very curious for NHK to run their poll again and to see where Final Fantasy 16 would place. I do think it's criminal that Duodecim is at number 26. Yeah, Lightning is high, but the game isn't. Yeah, that's what it is. I think people like Lightning really well in Japan. So if you go over to like the characters and you look at that, Lightning is number 8. And then Emmett Selk is number 6. So, however, even if you do that, Lightning is number 8, and then I think you don't get another Final Fantasy 13 character until Hope at number 48. And then again, if you look at the bosses ranking and summons, it's all 7, 10, 14, and then you get to like you get like 2 things. You get 1 thing from Final Fantasy 13. Sorry, that's Dark Cloud from FF3. So you get 1 thing from Blinded by Light actually did pretty well for FF13. Tizanarkin being number 1 is pretty interesting. People in Japan really like Lightning, which is probably why we got a solo game. That actually makes sense. I think Lightning is possibly more popular in Japan than her game, which is at least what the polling here suggests. Or at the very least, I think her design was iconic enough to kind of do it. But yeah, incredibly based Japan, Final Fantasy X #1. Um, Actually, I think that if you ran this poll in the US and in most places in Europe, you would get a pretty similar result. The only thing I think would change for if you ran this poll in the West is that I think Westerners prefer Final Fantasy VII over 10. So I think FF7 would probably be on top if you ran this poll in the West. But that makes sense to me that 7 and 10 are generally the most popular two FF games. Probably no matter where you poll. But I do think in the West it would be a reverse of that. But yeah, that being said, I've never seen anything that like really suggests that it's like purely a Western thing. I go and read discourse about Final Fantasy games in Japanese all the time, and I would say that the key difference between the way they discuss the games is not so much that you don't see the same gripes that you would in the Japanese complaints versus like Western complaints. I think that they're just expressed a lot more respectfully to kind of other people in their community and to the developers themselves. But you typically do see a lot of the same sentiments across both. I wouldn't say that it's like fully a one-to-one thing, but it's pretty common. Do you have links to Japanese forums or anything? I want to see those too. I mostly look at Japanese YouTube video comments. That's like my main thing. That's like usually what I do. I can show you some I can link you some Japanese FF channels later if you want. That are pretty good. Yeah. But typically you see like, at least I see. I'm not saying that it's like factually like that, but usually when I look it up and I'm reading this, you see a lot of the same sentiments. There are people in Japan that really prefer FF16 and think that that's the way things should go. There are people that are like Rebirth Goat, like that's how things that's how things should be. A lot of the phrasing and expression of those sentiments are different, but for the most part, I think gamers are really just kind of like gamers. I don't think that I think that the things that people appreciate about Final Fantasy are not as culturally divisive quite in the same way that people imagined it being. So anyways, all of that is just to say I have not actually seen anything that suggests that it was way more loved in Japan versus the West. I do think that, again, when I talked about how the expression of the sentiment differs, I do think that when Final Fantasy XIII launched, while there was a lot of legitimate criticism of it being made, a lot of that legitimate criticism also weaved in a lot of xenophobic comments and sentiments that were very prevalent about Japanese games during the time. So, I mean, they would make a semi-valid criticism of it, like, say how rigid the world design was, but then they would weave that in with, like, JRPGs are so dated, and JRPGs aren't real RPGs, and they kind of, like, conflate those two things together, and they weren't particularly making criticism that was necessarily constructive in any way, while just kind of slamming, JRPGs as a whole. So I think that is more of the difference than, say, like, a game is like shunned in the West, but then the people in Japan think it's GOAT. A lot of Japanese fans I speak to here are either open to turn-based or action that is not divisive for them like it is in the West. Yeah, I don't think it's like it's that much. I have noticed too. They aren't as like super divisive about that aspect. And I don't think that like there are definitely Japanese fans that believe they should go back to turn-based, but like I have not personally seen the same mentality that they have here, where if you ask for that, people are like, you need to play Bravely Default or Octopath Traveler. That much I don't personally see. Hendrix, thank you so much for the super chat. FF is character / party based, great story and world building and awesome character upgrades. That is all FF needs to focus on moving forward. Yeah, I completely agree. I do think that like party focus in particular is something that really needs to be a big deal. And I know this sounds like really like kind of arbitrary, but it's not. But I think that one thing that they can really do to make me feel like confidence in Final Fantasy 17 is show that we have like a 6-person party or something like that for 17. And it's not like you play as one character and you do have to choose your party members and stuff like that. I know that sounds arbitrary, but it's actually really not. I want a bigger party that isn't really confined, because basically everything after 13 has been really small parties, if not a party at all. Well, I mean, everything after 13. I mean, basically just 15 and 16. And so I kind of want them to return to having at least 6 party members that you can play from. Again, thank you so much for the super chat, man. The actual FF game that shows the clear divide between, or difference between Japanese and Western fans is Final Fantasy V, the real GOAT. FF5 is a lot more popular over there. Granted, it didn't release until the PS1 version in the West, but still Western fans who started with say 7 have a bad habit of not playing the older, earlier titles. Yeah, well, that's because they were PlayStation kids, so they don't want to go back and play the Super Nintendo stuff. The leap from, first of all, thank you for another super chat, bro. The leap from FF6 to 7 was a big tech leap, but being groundbreaking now should be depth, not crazy mechanic changes. Yeah, I mean, I do think that, like, basically with Final Fantasy 7 through 10, Square Enix made, I mean, honestly, we can really say Final Fantasy 7 through 13, really, is that Square Enix really made a name for themselves. Well, it depends on how you want to cut it off. But we'll just say, starting with 7, they made a name for themselves for being the most cutting-edge visuals that a console game can possibly have at that point in time. Like, Final Fantasy represents the game you buy to show off how impressive the visuals are for a current generation system. And this is why whenever you look back at Final Fantasy games, they are usually some of the best looking games of their respective generation. I think this starts at like Final Fantasy 1 even, if we're being honest, which was actually a pretty good looking Famicom game. And then I think that extends with Final Fantasy VI, which is also an incredibly good-looking Super Famicom game. 7, 8, and 9, in a lot of ways, like the best-looking RPGs that were available on PS1. And then, I mean, like, you look at 8 and 9 and how goddamn good-looking those games were compared to, like, everything else on the platform. It is fucking awesome, dude, how those games look. And then Final Fantasy X and 12 on PS2, and how they blow away so many PlayStation 2 games, which is really impressive considering how big that game's library is. Final Fantasy 13 stands right next to Uncharted and to God of War 3 and other Sony first party games as being, one of the best looking games on PlayStation 3, to the point of where I think that you can remaster that game graphically with ease. Like, the most you really need to do is like maybe more modern looking lighting and maybe like some slightly higher resolution textures on stuff, but 13 still holds up incredibly well. I think, and this is kind of a difficult point to communicate, but I think that it didn't really start to become really indifferent visually until Final Fantasy 15. FF15 is visually impressive, but because the game is janky, it doesn't feel impressive, but its lighting and system and hair is unbelievable. Yeah. But I think FF15 is probably the point where I think, like with the titles on PlayStation 4, I think it's where things got competitive to a point of where, yes, Final Fantasy 15, especially if you play it on PC and you play the Windows edition, is super impressive. But it's like, it started at that point to be like, every game kind of looks this impressive. I think that's where, and again, it's not like 15 failed on this aspect. It was kind of just like, when you look at God of War 2018, and then you look at like The Last of Us Part 2 and Horizon Zero Dawn and, all the other games that were coming out during that generation and how good so many PS4 games looked, it was kind of like, yeah, Final Fantasy 15 does look really good. It does. But it's also not like the most mind-blowing game I've ever seen in the way 13 and previous like were at the time. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't like the look or the feeling that I got when I turned on Final Fantasy X for the first time and I saw the real-time graphics and the CGI scenes and it was like, what the fuck? Video games have never looked this good before. 15 is kind of where that started to be indifferent. And it wasn't really Square's fault. It's just that everyone else caught up. That's the best way to say it. And it wasn't really that impressive. And I think that like with their recent games, like the 7R games and 16, again, really good looking. However, it's hard to be like, it's the best looking video game ever when like you pull up Death Stranding 2. And you put Death Stranding 2 next to like Rebirth and 16, and you're like, okay, that looks quite possibly better. Or you look at Horizon Forbidden West, and you're like, okay, well, shit. That might actually be the best looking video game ever made, period. And so I clearly they haven't fallen off. Like Final Fantasy 16, Rebirth are very good looking video games. They have great graphics. But everyone else has caught up or surpassed them basically on this front. And I don't think that the way for them to proceed is to just make better graphics. Because I don't know if better graphics will help them at this point. I don't think it will, TBH. I think the graphics are already really good. I agree that the best place for them to focus, as you said, Hendrix, really is just I think that Final Fantasy should be focused on groundbreaking gameplay and narrative. I think that's what their focus should be. And I think that they really need their gameplay and their narrative to work together and not against each other. And I think both of the CSs are kind of guilty of this, but CS1 less with 7R games and more with 13, and then CS3 with 16, and to a smaller extent 14 in some ways. But I think they overestimate how far a story can carry them nowadays. And I think that yes, they need to have a groundbreaking story, as I just mentioned, but I really do think that they need to like have a solid gameplay experience more than anything. For as much as we can talk about Final Fantasy stories, I think that most of the conjecture around the series just happens around gameplay. And this is why it always gets infuriating for me, I think, when uh, people just say that like Final Fantasy is just about the good story. But I'm like, people haven't been arguing about the story for all this. I mean, they have been, obviously, with 13, 15, and 16. But like, really, the most contentious thing has really been the gameplay more than anything. I think people really undersell and underestimate the value of Final Fantasy's gameplay by like a tremendous amount. And I think when you go back and revisit the older titles, you really start to realize what it was about it. I want to replay all the Golden Era games. I did a quick beeline of Final Fantasy VII just recently, just because it's been way too long since I've went back and did that. So I beelined it real quick, and I was like, okay, I have a good memory on this game now, so that I can more accurately talk about part 3. And I want to like go back through and just beeline all the FF titles really quickly, just so I can refresh myself on them. FF Tactics at number 11 in that list was a tragedy. I think Tactics was probably more popular in the West, I want to say, than it was in Japan. But would you argue that Expedition 33 has better gameplay than 7R? Oh, Final Fantasy Files, that's tough. I don't think the experience. Oh, yeah, first of all, Roy Mustang, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for this super chat. And also too, I'll find out for myself when I play Tactics. So I wouldn't say that like combat of Expedition 33 is better than 7R. I think what might make Expedition 33 a better game for people would be kind of the holisticness of the experience, if that makes sense. I think that Expedition 33 is just going to I think it's just going to have a better paced experience for most people. And so they would probably prefer that. Hi, Leon. Hello. Yeah, we covered most of the new stuff, and now we're just chatting, man. I think that, like, in a vacuum, most people would probably prefer Retrilogy's combat. But I don't know if I can say that because of how successful E33 was predicated on its combat. But if we put them on equal footings, right, and suggest that maybe people enjoyed E33's combat as much as 7R's, I think that E33 just ends up being the better paced game, and I think people really enjoy like a lot of the meta systems around it, and the story and the, I don't want to say the music is better, but some people may prefer it for sure. I don't think the music is necessarily better or worse. Some people might prefer the art, but again, that's just highly subjective. But I do think that more agreeable than that is, again, just the fact that the story is whole, right? So you start E33 and then you finish E33 and you got like a complete story, and the pacing of E33's story is pretty damn exceptional. I do think that there are some problems narratively in Act 3 with E33 and gameplay wise that kind of stop E33 from being like lol perfect JRPG ever, but like I do think it's like an incredibly solid game. And I think that people kind of underestimate it purely on, not doing anything new. But as I've talked about before, like it's really important to say I don't think that Final Fantasy VII gameplay wise didn't really do a fuck ton of new things that no other game had ever done before when it came out. It was literally just like, we're going to build on Final Fantasy VI and we're going to make the highest production, best execution of that type of game in 3D. And that's basically what FF7 is, right? And similarly, Persona 5, which again, hugely influential game, but P5 also really didn't do anything that like no other. I mean, Persona 4 literally does everything P5 does. And like it didn't do anything that no other JRPG did before. I think people really overstate how important it is to just do like a new mechanic, for example, and not how important it is to have a good execution, right? Like quality, exceptional execution is more important than it is to be the first person to ever do a mechanic ever, or the first person to ever do a thing ever. Being the first, I think, is overrated. And I think that interesting execution trumps being the first person to do a thing every single time almost. Taking things interesting places, adding interesting production values, etc. Mostly same combat style, but with new upgrade system is usually enough for me. FF5 or 10. I mean, generally, yeah. I mean, I mean, well, not 10, yeah, because 10 has different combat. But see, 10's combat 10's combat felt like they took away a thing and replaced it with an objectively better version, right? Like it didn't feel like, oh, they took ATB away and they replaced it with something I like less. Most people who like ATB will also like Final Fantasy X's gameplay. And they probably will like that combat better than they will like ATB. Not to say they will like Final Fantasy X better, but they will probably say that they'll probably at least concede that the conditional turn-based system is better thought out and more strategic than ATB. Even if they don't like other aspects of 10, they'll still admit that, yeah, the system itself is actually better. But not everyone, but I think that most people you talk to, there will be a comment on the VOD or in chat where people are like, actually, I thought conditional turn-based combat was ass and ATB cleared. But like, I do think that most people will say that conditional turn-based was mostly a better system. Speaking of E33 and Rebirth, do you think there's a chance that 7R3 has an E33 reference? I think that'd be great. I love how closely they're working together and how much they're saying, actually, fuck you, E33, like not E33 fan, but like fuck you, like Twitter JRPG nerds. We're working with JRPG devs, and they love us, and we love them, and we don't care about people who are chronically online and don't take baths and argue about which game is better when both of the developers love each other and don't give a fuck. So I think that's great. The first that being the first to do a mechanic thing is interesting actually. Early on in Dragon Quest series, Yuji Horii had the mindset that if he didn't do something first, he wouldn't put it in the games. Thankfully, his mindset changed on that, which is why DQ2 ended up having party members in the ship, etc., and multiple world maps in 3. Because Horii realized that doing those ideas first doesn't matter as much as doing them well. Yeah, that is the thing, right? Like, we don't remember who did it first. We remember who did it good. you know? Like, or who did it really bad and turned us off of the idea. We remember that too. But first doesn't really matter as much as like, did you do it to the highest level possible? I think that is where things are kind of exceptional. Like, okay, Elden Ring is one of the greatest games of all time. Elden Ring doesn't really do anything that no game has ever done before. Like, not really. Most of the Souls games before it already did that stuff, except the open world, which, again, other games have done. But why do we call Elden Ring one of the best video games of all time, even though Elden Ring didn't invent a brand new mechanic, which you apparently need to do in order for a game to be notable, according to JRPG fans, right? Well, because it took everything that they had been doing and it made it the best fucking way possible. Elden Ring is just Breath of the Wild Dark Souls. Bro, yes. That's all it is. But that is what makes it cool and unique, because it's Breath of the Wild Dark Souls, right? Because it took those two things and put those two things together that made it interesting. And similarly, that's how I think about E33, is that yes, if you want to be like maniacal and like and super critical, and you want to sit there and break down every single mechanic of Expedition 33, yeah, nothing in there is new, 100%. But if you look at the game holistically, a lot of the things, the way that it puts all of the things together and all of its inspirations together is completely brand new. I feel like Breath of the Wild Dark Souls is a bit reductive. I mean, to be fair, I think that they're just trying to point out that it's not like they invented brand new mechanics, or it was something that like per mechanic a thing that never existed before. It's just the way they put it together and the quality that they put it together. But you can look at the designs and you can say, well, Breath of the Wild did the world design first and Dark Souls did the combat first. And so, yeah, it's kind of purposely being reductive in a way to prove the point that looking at games through that lens itself is reductive, if that makes sense. And that's why, like, whenever like you see JRPG fans talking about it, they're being reductive, right? So honestly, that's why I'm excited for KH4. I know people didn't like KH3 because of the mechanics bloat, but it was definitely trying to do this exact thing, but they went wrong about it way in parts of it. I think KH4 will continue what 3 tried to do, but in a more solid way, as we see some of that Remind's combo modifications. Yeah. I think KH4 will be like Kingdom Hearts 2, right? And I think we'll look back at Kingdom Hearts 3 as kind of like the KH1 version of the new style of combat, and we'll say, yeah, it's kind of clunky, but then the way KH4 built on it ended up making it kind of this more exceptional thing. Oh yeah, Demon Souls. Yes, Demon Souls would be first. You're right, Crossy. Even then, the idea of punishing gameplay and deliberately so animations and witty combat was not new. Hell, I've always thought that the Souls games feel like taking old school Monster Hunter and changing direction from hunting big mobs to a more traditional dungeon crawler. Most things in art are not new if we're looking at them on a like individual level, right? So yeah, if you look at Dark Souls, then and on an individual mechanical level and on like an ideas level, then like nothing about Dark Souls or Demon Souls was actually fucking new. Like, not really. But when you take the holistic view of what those games are, then they're very fucking new. They're very fucking different than what has come before it. And so I think that that's kind of how I look at like E33, is just that, yeah, you can be reductive about it. You could say um that like every JRPG is like this, but I think when you actually look at the way they put it together and the quality that it's built with and everything like that, it does come up being like a very new thing. The more art one consumes, the more you realize, especially with storytelling, things are remixes of other works. The novelty is in the approach of the remix. With games, it's a bit different because mechanical innovation has more room to go. That's perfectly said, Hylia. Perfectly said. Um, that's also what I think of too when I think people are so obsessed with like you have to do like, if it's not like a new mechanic that the game does, like a brand new mechanic that no one has ever seen before or something like that, then it's just like, oh, then every like it's just like this game, and try to be reductive about it. But yeah, it's genuinely more about how you are putting those things together and the quality that you're putting it together with, um, rather than just how much is it that nobody has ever done this before. Um, I think that's probably overrated, and I think quality of execution and, as you put it, the novelty and how you approach that remix is like underrated. And I think we value more the novelty by which you approach the remixing aspect more than we value just the fact that it has never been done before in history. Because really, who gives a fuck about whether something has actually never been done before in history? Really, I think um, we just care about how much we kind of enjoy our experience and how it ends up speaking to us. So I like that Hamaguchi says in the interview, it's not or for this game or that game or action or turn based. It's and let's have both. That's actually pretty cool. I just want a more efficient dev cycle for FF. Give me three double AFFs over one giant bloated entry. Well, I mean, in order for that to happen, you would need multiple FF teams, but that's something that they've had like for a really long time now. Um, they basically have had multiple FF teams since after Final Fantasy VII. So I heard a brief commentary on Breath of the Wild, Dark Souls, and Elden Ring, and it's funny because all three of these are part of the same undercurrent. Dark Souls is literally Ocarina of Time combat with early JRPG mechanics and Zelda 2 progression design. Um, Breath of the Wild iterated on Dark Souls, and Elden Ring iterated on Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild fans often call Elden Ring the first sequel to that game. I'm of the camp that it's the only sequel. Yeah, because I know you hate tears. Um, but yeah, you're right. You're right. And no one would fucking say that, or no one saying would say that, like, oh, Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring aren't some of the greatest video games of all time, even though they are built off of established things that we all know, and we can individually break down the mechanics and tell you games that did that before Breath of the Wild did or before Elden Ring did, and even still, those are still some of the greatest games of all time because of how they approached remixing the existing elements, which made them feel like nothing else you've ever played before, especially when done to the quality that they were done to. So it's really insane. Whenever you listen to, like JRPG fans on social media, because, yeah. Are you talking about this because people are downplaying E33's battle design? Yeah, it came up as a topic. And I was like, who gives a fuck whether, they're like the first person to do parries, for example, in a turn based game? I don't think that really matters very much. I think people really focus too much on that, or they'll say like, "Oh, Xenoblade did this concept first," and I'm like, who cares? Who cares? Um, this doesn't really. But what a bizarre criticism, yeah. But it's like the most common criticism of these types of games. When it comes to E33's battle design, I feel like the Korean team that did all the animations deserves way more exposure. Those guys are top of the class. They are. Because the fun of that game's combat comes from that team, to be honest. And they did such an exceptional job with those animations. It's ridiculous. And so I don't think that you can really say that Expedition 33 is good alone purely because of Sandfall. The Korean outsourcing team played a massive role in how great that game is. And I don't think they should be. Honestly, I think animations aren't appreciated like they should be in general. Yeah, I think that anything that like Expedition 33 or action games kind of in general, like animation work actually determines how fun that system is to interact with in most cases. And the animation work you have to do, especially in action games particularly, is so laborious and thorough, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of time and knowledge to produce those types of systems and make them feel good. And so, yeah. I'm so glad that people don't want turn-based combat discussion can finally end. I don't think it's definitely not going to end. I don't think that people don't want turn-based combat discussion will ever end unless a new turn-based Final Fantasy game came out. I think that's the only way that conversation would ever actually come to a head. And I don't know if they would ever make like a brand new mainline turn-based FF, but we'll see. If I were to criticize E33's battle design, novelty is not even on the radar. 99% of the best JRPGs have iterative design. If one complained about E33's balance, that would hold farmer weight. 1000% agree. Like P5 probably wouldn't be bigger than P4 if it wasn't for those animations. 100%. The main thing that separates P5 from P4, and this isn't just to say that, everything about P5 to P4 was negligible, but really made P5 like kind of take off is definitely rooted in the visuals and the visual upgrade from P4 to P5. Like the way they stepped up the production values, especially here in the West, made a lot more people willing to check out P5 over P4. And that's not to say that P4 wasn't popular. It definitely and very obviously was. However, P5 was just such a quantum leap in presentation for Persona games that a lot of people that didn't previously look at Persona 4 definitely did look at Persona 5 just because it looked so fucking cool. And still today is like visually like one of the coolest looking games out there just because of how stylish and sleek it is. Recently played Persona 3 Reload. Great game. Yeah, I love Persona 3 Reload. Don't let Persona fans off topic, but nice curls today. I guess my curls are really on point today. Everyone's been saying the curls are rocking today. That's awesome. Thank you guys. Yeah, I don't know when we're gonna hear more about Persona 4 Revival. I'm curious when that's gonna roll out. I'm excited for that and P6, obviously, because I do think P6 will be announced this year for the 30th anniversary of Persona. And the source that I heard that from is me making it the fuck up right now. But I'm pretty sure it's gonna happen because the vibes are there. Why are we arguing about Why are we arguing about KH3 data fights in YouTube chat? What's going on? Let's be honest, the moment turn-based FF returns, all the people on the side of no turn-based will reconsider on the basis of the brand hype alone. I'm willing to hard bet on that. This applies to other facets of FF returning to roots as well. I think people underestimate how social media rots people's brains on art discussion, on all discussion, especially politics, brother. But yeah, if FF's core fandom today are people who are on board with literally anything the brand tries, regardless of identity, a return to form would probably not be a problem to anyone. Yeah, I mean that's definitely the thing. I don't think that, and again, like I've said, obviously I really do love the Retrilogy style of combat, and I'm totally fine with them continuing to do that. But I'm also not against turn-based, let's say. And I do think that, let's say with Final Fantasy 16, for example, it wouldn't have sold less if it was turn-based, right? Like I don't think that like it would have been like, oh no. Now it's like because it's turn-based, it's only 2 million at launch, right? I don't think that would have happened. It's really hard for me to imagine. On your curls, we're getting KH info this year, bro. If I go bald, it's gonna be because of you, Jose. If I were a brand manager, I would keep the 7R battle design for a spin-off series with a huge budget and highlight like Tactics got back then. Nah, it's too good and probably too expensive to make for a spin-off series. I think that battle system is good enough to definitely continue to be a mainline battle system. But that being said, I don't think that a return to turn-based would be bad either. I think if I was the brand manager, I would be doing 2 Final Fantasy battle systems where I would basically be making it trade off and on. So I would make it so that odd number of Final Fantasies would probably be like turn-based, and I'd make it so that the even numbered Final Fantasies would be like 7R style action. If anything, I would do that. Because I do think that system is just too good to keep it off. But if anything, yeah, I would do something like that. Because I do think that can be a multi-million seller heavy hitting battle system. But I feel like, I mean, part of the problem is that they launched it with, I mean, it's not really a problem per se, but it's just like for that battle system to be popularized, launching it in a multi-part series was a tough thing to do, right? Yeah, they need to make both systems. I think that they were kind of like, I think it was kind of silly for them to not make a high budget turn-based Final Fantasy while they were doing their action things to begin with. Because I think they built up a lot of resentment that they didn't need to build up while they were trying action. You know what I'm saying? Like they should have had things that like really kept the turn-based fans engaged. And it's funny too because a lot of people are like, they did have those things. Bravely Default, Octopath Traveler, but I'm like, those are things, one, that aren't Final Fantasy, right? So they're not engaging with the Final Fantasy brand. They're engaging with Team Asano, which is technically Enix's lineage and not even like Squaresoft's. And also, like, they're not Final Fantasy games, even though Bravely Default is really close. It's more Final Fantasy V, which is great if you love Final Fantasy V, right? But if you came into Final Fantasy from FF7 through 10, you don't really look at Bravely Default and think that like Bravely Default is more FF7 through 10. It's more FF5, specifically FF5. And again, if you want more FF5, that's awesome. But if you don't want more FF5 and you're of the majority of those people who came in at Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and 10, then I think recommending people Bravely Default is like what the fuck? That's like a continuation of Super Nintendo Final Fantasy, not a continuation of PlayStation Final Fantasy. If anything, you'd recommend them Fantasian, right? Because that's actually closer to being PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy. But not Bravely Default and not Octopath, right? That's a different thing. Like those games also too, like artistically are not like the Final Fantasy games that I think those people are looking for, right? Which those people are looking for probably something Nomada adjacent. I mean, and there's also World of Final Fantasy, but, and I'm going to be real here, I do think that the art style of World of Final Fantasy hurt that game a lot sales-wise. I think that if they made World of Final Fantasy look more like Kingdom Hearts overall, because obviously you have like the chibi characters and you have the full-sized models. I think if they just used the full-size models and made it look more like Kingdom Hearts, it would have been a lot more successful than using the more chibi style proportions. I agree with what you're saying, and I think they should continue to make turn-based FF games, but I do think it's weird that other turn-based games they make are being written off for not being called Final Fantasy. I don't think they're being written off for not being called Final Fantasy, because it's not like Bravely Default and Octopath don't sell well, you know? But also, people will be quick to point out that say, like, they'll be like, well, 16 is a real final, and this is just for argument's sake, so don't take this as my actual opinion. But people will say, oh, 16 is a real Final Fantasy, and then they might say, oh, 16 is not a real Final Fantasy. And that argument will be predicated based on the fact of how Final Fantasy 16 plays. They will say that, oh, it doesn't really play like a Final Fantasy. Then they'll say, like, well, if it doesn't play like a Final Fantasy to you, then go play Bravely Default or go play Octopath or any of Team Asano games. But then that means that we're saying on some level that Final Fantasy is a gameplay. It's either a style of gameplay or it's a brand. It's both, but people will kind of divide it up in two. So is it a brand, and anything that you put Final Fantasy on is Final Fantasy? Or is it a gameplay experience and it has to have these things, and if it doesn't have those things, it's not Final Fantasy, right? So the actual nature of the argument suggests that it's either just a brand and anything that you put Final Fantasy on is Final Fantasy, or it's a gameplay, and Square Enix no longer makes games that are Final Fantasy, that are called Final Fantasy. They just make lower budget HD 2D games that are Final Fantasy, right? So which one is it? Final Fantasy is not defined by its battle mechanics, IMO. See, I disagree. I think it is. I think it's defined by everything. I think it's defined by its story, its the type of art that it uses, the type of music that it uses. I think it's defined by the battle mechanics, by the upgrade mechanics. I think it's defined by everything, right? And I think for every other video game series in the world, I think that's like not even a debate. All right, like I don't think we would ever debate like is Zelda defined by its story or by its gameplay or is defined by the fact that you control Link. Everyone would be like, what the fuck? It's defined by all of those things. Like, that's the complete identity. I think it's also like saying, like, are you your brain or your body? I don't know. Like, I don't think that, like, I agree it's defined by all parts, but I'm saying not just one thing. Yeah, for sure. It can't just be distilled by just the combat. So I would agree that, like, if you're saying that Final Fantasy is not only combat, then yeah, I would agree. It's holistically, it's everything. It's the combat. It's the music and the lineage behind the music and the artists who have worked on it. It's all those things. But I think that a lot of the times on social media, what you'll see is that the way people look at it is that it's just the story. It's defined by a great story, and that is a component of it, and that may even be one of the most important components. But I don't think it's the only important component. I think that the actual game part and how that game is basically comes together is also how the story is told, which means that I don't think you can separate the gameplay from the story of Final Fantasy games. FF is a JRPG with a stylistic identity defined by audiovisual sensibilities of Hironobu Sakaguchi and Nobuo Uematsu, the storytelling approach, the presentation appealing for all ages, the character design, and the battle design. Yeah. It's all those things. As a kid, FF art to me was Tetsuya Nomura. So when I first saw something like FF12, I was confused because that wasn't FF. And that's also kind of a interesting thing, because I do think that Nomura's art has, in a very strong way, defined how we look at Final Fantasy, and his visual style is definitely by far the most popular. I would probably, and this is weird. I don't know if I would say that it's, I'm thinking in my head, is Nomura as impactful for Final Fantasy as Toriyama is for Dragon Quest? I don't know if that's like a good equivalence or not, but it did come to my head just now and I'm thinking on it. And I would say that Amano's art and artists like Akihiko Yoshida, they've been like really important, and some other people too. However, I do think that it's probably true to say that nobody has probably defined the visual identity of Final Fantasy more than him. Like, in like the cultural zeitgeist. Like, whenever someone goes to describe a Final Fantasy character, they basically are describing Nomura's work. Like, the most generic possible like description of a Final Fantasy character, it would probably be something more adjacent to Nomura's work than anything else. Like, I feel like if you were to like go and ask like a large language model to like describe to you a final, like make up a Final Fantasy protagonist and describe its design, it would probably describe a Nomura character. Not that that's the bar of of what is popularly accepted is what an LLM spits out. It's just to say that, like, it's an amalgamation of all the training data of the internet, and it would take the general consensus of the internet's expectations and spit out that. And I do think that would probably tell you quite a lot about the general thought that people are having, if that makes sense. I don't know if that was a good analogy or not, or a good way to express that. So people didn't like 16 art style. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's not bad. I don't think most people criticize 16's art, though. Um, I don't think it's like the main thing that people are critical of. It's not what I'd personally prefer from this series, but I don't know if I could say that it's bad. I'd probably just say that, yeah, it's just not what I personally prefer from this series, like in terms of visual identity. But I think if I were to go on a tangent again about what's wrong with that game, as I have in many other cases, I don't think that would be at the top of like the list for like what I think is like most fundamentally wrong about it, if that makes sense. I definitely like 14's art more than 16. I think 14's art is infinitely better than 16's. It is not even like in the same ballpark. I think 14's art clears 16 in every possible facet other than like graphical fidelity, obviously. But in terms of the art itself, 14 achieves the Final Fantasy way more. Way more. Way more than 16. Like, way, way, way more. Um, in terms of character design, environmental design, um, yeah. I can go on and on. So 14 blows 16 out of the water with looking like an FF game. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was like not even close. It is like not even close. I felt 16 was a huge step down from 14 in terms of, well, a lot of things, honestly, but a lot of things, but definitely in terms of art and definitely in terms of character design, because I think both of those things are way better in Final Fantasy 14. Kazuya Takahashi is so talented in his concept art or portrait art, but I don't think it translates well in the game. It doesn't really translate as well into game, but yeah, if you go back and look at like his original artworks for 16, they're really brilliant. But yeah, in game, I feel kind of indifferent about it. Yeah, I do think that 14 just has like, for as good of a balance between like levity and serious moments that people say that Rebirth had, I think 14 actually balances those things even better, which is all the more reason why I think that like for me 16 kind of fell off in that way, because I was just like, dang, 14 can be funny, it can be hopeful and happy, it can also be sad and even like disturbing at times. There are actually like legitimately scenes that I felt were actually kind of that just really stood out in my mind, like that moment in Endwalker where Zeno steals your body. That was such like a violating moment. It's great. 14 is kind of a master of tone, and so just to see 16 kind of like fumble that was kind of crazy, especially coming from so much of the same overlapping talent. Last week I saw a post that inspired me to compare Kyrie and Cage 2 and 3. It's crazy. Understated topic. Cage 1 and 2 characters were extremely similar in 97. FF7 approach for facial design, eyes, eyelashes, proportions. Something happened with BBS to put in no return. Now there's a 97. Now there's no 97 art left for video games. It's all Final Fantasy X or a stylized version of that. I mean, that kind of makes sense. I don't know. Do you watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Hylian? Like if you watch JoJo's, um, Hirohiko Araki, or not watch JoJo's, I should say. I should say, do you read JoJo's? And there's an important distinction here, because I do think that you need to look at Dingo. Hello, Dingo. I do think that you need to like look at the actual art of Hirohiko Araki to understand like what I'm saying with this. So if you ever like look at JoJo's artworks, this does get translated to the anime, obviously. But JoJo, each part of JoJo looks different than the last part. I think only part 1 and 2 look similar. And even then, there are stylistic differences between part 1 and 2. But basically, Hirohiko Araki, because he just continuously evolves as an artist. Every part of JoJo looks entirely different from the last. And now we have part 9 coming out of JoJo, and part 9 of JoJo looks so completely, utterly different than part 1 that it doesn't even look like the same artist anymore. And I think we also have seen something similar happen on a smaller scale with Persona, right? So, Soejima, his art from the earlier SMT and Persona games and his art from Persona 5 are completely different. And some people didn't like the fact that Soejima updated the characters for Persona 3 Reload to his new style. And you see that style in Persona 5, for example. And so, a lot of people were like, oh, it's soulless now because he created it in his new art style. But I think it's just really common for artists to, for like, especially career artists, to kind of change and evolve their art as time goes along in different meaningful ways. So in the comparison, the DMs, this is interesting. Let's have a look. So I'll say this much. Let me pull it up on screen so chat can have a look at this. Because I do think that there is something really to say here. You know, you have the CG model of Kairi from Kingdom Hearts 2 versus Kingdom Hearts 3. First of all, I just want to say, and I think like literally no one disagrees, but the design for Kingdom Hearts 2 was just better. I just wasn't into the Kingdom Hearts 3 design. I just think that the Kingdom Hearts 2 design for Kairi is just like the best. She looks younger in 3. She does for some reason. Like even though she's older, she looks younger for some reason. I think it's just because of the shorter hair mostly. But I see what you're saying. A lot of people still actually prefer the older art style for Kingdom Hearts as well in general. Some people are really mad about Kingdom Hearts 4 even because Kingdom Hearts 4 it looks like Versus 13. Obviously not like one for one because the characters aren't fully 100% realistic, but it doesn't look like Kingdom Hearts, and I think that's a very fair statement to make. But yeah. It's worth mentioning that Nomura was very young back when he drew for FF7 and PE. You tend to see a lot less change when artists grow older and settle into a particular style like Amano. That's very true, Ian. And I think that's why I had to compare Hirohiko Araki or Soejima, where the style is going to evolve. So I don't think that Nomura would really be drawing 97 Nomura like 30 years later. I just don't expect him to do that. And I think that actually, despite the evolution of his style, I do still think that his character designs and the art style of his most recent games still have a look that if you time traveled to the future from 97 to 2025 and you looked at his current games, you would still know that he was the one who created those characters. Versus like if you time traveled from like when JoJo's Part 1 came out to right now and you saw JoJo Part 8 You would not fucking know that's the same guy at all. You would not think that's Hirohiko Araki. Um, I don't agree that Sora and Riku look like they got de-aged necessarily. But I do agree that I feel like I do think Kyrie did feel that way. Yeah, Sora and Riku do look like modern Final Fantasy characters, but I think that's purposeful. Have you seen the Roberto Ferrari version of Kyrie? No, what the fuck? I didn't even know that's a thing. I also think he's like one of the most underestimated, or not underestimated, but underappreciated character designers in Square. I googled it, but I don't see anything. Okay, yeah, go ahead and DM me that. I'm very curious. Also, for Seven, he was specifically tasked to draw a contemporary anime style. So his style from eight onwards is probably more of his neutral style. Yeah, I mean, eight onwards is like when he kind of like really locked into doing his own style and like it being him. Yeah, Hylian, I'm looking at like the Riku comparison, but even then, I don't know if he looks like older or younger necessarily, just different. I like his more Sephiroth looking face in KH2 than like his look in KH3, but also it's more probably the hair change, I think, than anything. I think yeah, I don't think he looks necessarily older or younger to me. He just looks better in KH2. But I don't think anyone disagrees with you on that. I think everyone agrees that Riku looks better in KH2. Oh, this is tight as fuck. I'll pull it up. I never knew that Roberto Ferrari drew Kyrie. That's cool. Or drew a version of Kyrie. KH2 is the best Riku has ever looked. I wonder how he'll look in 4. Yeah, I know. The long hair and like the really moody looking face that he had, it was such a banger, bro. It was such a banger. And I just man, it was just the coolest shit. So I don't know if they'll ever get Riku back to being that cool, but I prefer his seven era anime style though. I think that's like when he was like making his coolest characters. I think the thing is now that we just don't see enough Nomura artwork to actually like to actually even have a preference, because I don't even see him putting out too many artworks anymore. Like I feel like we rarely see new art from him, and I really hate that because I like his art. The thing with Seven being Nomura tasked with modern anime aesthetics is that why would Nomura have more freedom with KH, had him opt out for his 97 approach and not FF8? Um, I think that it just was more compatible with the way the Disney characters looked. I think that was kind of like the primary thing he was thinking about, especially when you look at like Final Fantasy 8 and 10, which were kind of overlapping the development of Kingdom Hearts 1. But I think you can also look at KH and look at where he's moving with KH4, and you can also note that he is moving KH forward to realism as well. Nomura just likes realism. He just likes his designs to come to life in a more realistic style. He's talked about this quite often. Yeah, he prefers fantasy based on reality. and he's kind of finding, he's basically making Kingdom Hearts into that. So I think he's just always really liked it, because he also had a lot of creative freedom with Final Fantasy VIII too. And that's when he was able to move the art style in the way that he wanted it to be. So I think he has always like kind of preferred the look of Versus and Final Fantasy VIII and 10 over his 97 style, which is why I don't think you see him use it that often. And of course, you're always free to disagree with that. But in terms of his personal preference and what he wants to do, it seems like what he wants to do is make realistic anime hybrid stuff like he's been doing since FF8. So that seems to be the thing. But also, I think that that anime realism hybrid has basically become the visual identity of the series. And so, yeah. Might be why Roberto Ferrari does 7R designs, yeah. Roberto Ferrari is an incredible character designer, man. I think I read that Nomad often creates the imagery first and writes the story around it. I mean, that makes sense, right? As an artist, I imagine that he thinks primarily visually and then rationalizes kind of the thing behind the visuals. I don't think that's a wrong way to approach stories, by the way. I think it's perfectly fine if you're more of a visual thinker to come up with the imagery and then make it compelling. Yeah, Roberto Ferrari did design Arden and Aranea, and that's why 15 has really amazing character designs. It's just so insanely unfortunate that those incredible character designs were not used for anything meaningful. That they kind of got like, well, you know how Final Fantasy 15 goes, so. Yeah, KH2 Riku is like the peak of aesthetic. Like, it just doesn't get any cooler than KH2 Riku's look. Now I'm sad, Ryan. Why? What did I say? So much potential? Yeah, I know. I know. We're going to have a lot of tears uh, as we deep dive into Final Fantasy 15 this year. So, one of the videos that should be coming eventually is just going to be about the development of Final Fantasy 15. And I know what you're thinking when you hear that is, hasn't many people already done a development video of Final Fantasy 15? I think when people do these types of videos on FF15, it's always about verses, right? Like, this is like what verses wanted to be, and then this is what 15 was. So I'm actually wanting to do a video that is actually centric to Final Fantasy 15 and what went right and wrong with its conversion. So I've already kind of basically made a Final Fantasy Versus video, and I'll talk more about Versus 13 later on, and I'll probably mention Versus 13 in those videos as well, because they are inseparable. But I actually want my 15 video to start from 2013 with the conversion to 15 and not actually go in too much depth about verses in that video, because you could talk about verses all day. Like there's so much versus stuff that I think a lot of the interesting things that happened between 2013 to 2015 gets kind of overlooked. And so no one like really talks about that. Will you talk about the Luminous engine? Yeah, of course. But yeah, I just really want to talk about like the conversion to 15 and the development for 15 itself, because again, I think every video you'll find 15 kind of gets compressed in most videos, and the timeline's kind of like really focused on like verses leading up to the cancellation of verses, which again is really important. But no one posture in his speech. True. Thanks. But no one really focuses on the actual development of Final Fantasy 15. So that's what I want to do with those videos. That time frame is the least talked about thing for FF15, and I'd say it's the most frustrating episode probably in Nobuna's career. It has to be like the worst few years in his entire career, bro. It has to be. I need to know what happened in 2013 and 2014. That's when I think a lot of really interesting stuff happened that I don't think a lot of people talk about. So like when I did the Versus video, like the common thing to do with the Versus video is to talk about Crystal Tools. And the whole thing is like, this is what happened with Crystal Tools. I could tell that story in my sleep. I remember all the interviews, like they're baked into my brain, etc., etc. So actually, when I made that Versus video, I was like, I'm not going to talk about the shit that people already know about with Versus. Like, I'm not going to like be like, yeah, this was Crystal Tools, and Crystal Tools wasn't like really well suited for open world games, and Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 bombed, and like, and just recount to you things that like I feel like people already know and has just already been talked about in every video previous, including my own videos. So I wanted to focus on like the aspects of Versus that like no one like really talked about, right? So I looked into like the Rowan stuff and like how like one of Rowan's designers is literally in fucking Neo Twiwi. He's actually in The World Ends With You. Like literally him and his actual name. And he sells like Final Fantasy Versus 13 clothing, which was like fucking mind blowing. So it was just really interesting to find out those things and put them all together and be like one of the things that I didn't know before making this video and that I found is that Nomura did not design Noctis for Versus 13. He designed Noctis to be the main character of Final Fantasy 13 because he didn't know that the team was planning to make the main character of 13 a girl. So he had already drew a character for 13, and they were like, oh, actually, we're making this a girl. We're making Lightning a girl. And I also found out something really interesting about Lightning, too, when I was looking this up, is that Nomura said that the original plan for Lightning was to be Asian, and I didn't know that. Like, she was going to be, like, visibly Asian, like, in terms of how she looked. But they didn't end up going with that, which I think is really interesting. Eventually, whenever we do a deep dive on Final Fantasy 13, I'll talk about that kind of stuff that I discovered. But yeah, that was some of like the interesting stuff that I came across when I was working on that. And these are all in like the Ultimanias, so a lot of this stuff hasn't been translated before, and a lot of people don't know about it. And so I've been deep diving, and some people have been very nice, and they've been basically like digging through Japanese Ultimanias and sending me stuff, and I'm like, oh shit, I can actually put this in the video. So yeah, the lightning thing was really crazy because I didn't even fucking know that at all. And so like whenever I discover something new about Versus that I didn't fucking know after all this time, that's when I fucking head exploded. So yeah, Ultimania stuff is so loaded with just rich information that like people in the West just don't even fucking know about. A lot of the Final Fantasy X stuff that I found was also very mind blowing for me because I just didn't know until I found the translation of the Ultimania Omega for Final Fantasy X that a fan just completed last year. And that's where I found stuff like, oh, Yuna was always meant to be a pop star, or stuff like that. I'm like, what the fuck? And it's crazy. I know some people hate on the Ultimanias, but you guys are like objectively wrong. The Ultimanias are cool. The Ultimanias, I get why people feel that like, oh, you shouldn't need the Ultimania to answer questions, and I get that like some stuff in the narrative should be like in the narrative and not in an Ultimania. And 10 to some degree is kind of guilty of this because I think that some of 10's information could have been presented a little bit more central. But the fact that we get like these books that detail so many concepts about the game and how those concepts evolved over time is actually really fucking cool and really important for historic purposes for documenting the games, especially since Square Enix themselves historically have just burned video games and all their servers after they finish compiling and shipping a game. So the Ultimanias actually serve an extraordinarily important piece of history in order to preserve the development history of these games. Square Enix loves forcing projects on Nomura so they can use his name for marketing, but they appear to hate giving him any serious creative control. Thanks for the drawings. Now back to the cupboard you go. That's so true. But I think actually when he has like the creative control, he does like incredible stuff. Both the KH and FF Ultimanias teach you so much about how the games are built, but also the art direction, design decisions that go into them. They're so interesting to read. Yeah. I think that they're more of a net win for fans than they are a loss in any way. Did Nomura have creative control of Kingdom Hearts 3? Yeah, he has a lot of creative control over Kingdom Hearts. Like the majority of it per se. But the problem is that Disney also has a ton of restrictions. And so it's not like he's always able to do everything he wants with Kingdom Hearts. And so a lot of the things that happen in KH, some stuff, yes, is him not choosing the correct thing, but a lot of it, if you deep dive into Kingdom Hearts, is Disney just saying, no, fuck you. You have to do this. Oh, did you know the only game he wrote the script for was 358 Days Over 2? And he said he'd never do it again because it was a grueling process. That's crazy. I didn't know that. But he's an auteur in like the truest sense. So, what game did Nomura have the most creative control on? Kingdom Hearts 2? Probably. But interestingly, I feel like he's lost creative control of almost every project that he's worked on. With Kingdom Hearts, it's often to Disney, right? With Final Fantasy, there's also like a ton of other people, and he's not able to kind of like fulfill his vision in the way that he specifically wanted to. And so Final Fantasy Versus 13 was kind of like the first time it was just going to be all him. And he was just going to be doing whatever the fuck he wanted to, completely unmitigated. And yeah, it's just really unfortunate that he was not able to do that. Nojima wrote KH1 and 2, right? Yeah. And this is why, low-key, KH1 and 2 have the best dialogue and scenes in them, and like the best pacing and kind of the best everything narratively, and why it feels so fucking different from everything else. Nojima also wrote the end game of KH3. That explains why that's the best part. That explains why that's the best part. Yeah, and then after Nojima was no longer on KH1 and 2, are on future KH games, there is a noticeable difference in how those games are written. Not saying they're good or bad. I'm just saying that like you can definitely tell that Nojima is no longer involved. And if you feel like there is something different about Birth by Sleep onward, that's probably the thing that you feel narratively more than anything. Nomura is in a vulnerable position insofar he's not on the board, unlike Kitase, etc. If the higher ups tell him to jump, he has to. Right. Yeah, Kitase and Yoshi P can do whatever the fuck they want to do. And Nomura cannot. He has to be kind of subjugated to whatever the bigger people in control want to do. And yeah, he doesn't have an administrative position. He just kind of has seniority and people respect him, right? It's not like he's actually in the position to actually do whatever he wants to do in most cases. Which sucks because I actually think he's the one who knows what they should be doing. And I think that a lot of the people in positions above him are the ones that don't know what the fuck they're doing. And he ends up being a fall guy for those people. But I think he is better than them. KH3 had a ton of both Disney interference and Square. Nomura didn't even want to work on KH3. He was off in investment on creative control on K8 since 2. Masaru Oka has a massive say on KH stories, and KH3 came out when SC pushed Nomura out of 15. You can connect the dots. Yeah. I think that Jacob Novik had actually kind of talked about this. And this was going to be in my thing. But damn, I don't know if I can find this anymore. I don't think I can find it anymore. I can't. I'll have to look for it later on. But he actually talked about it. And it was really interesting. Someone had maybe sent it to me. I'm checking my bookmarks really quickly. But it was super fascinating discussion. Damn. Nope. Don't see it anymore. So much for that. Not sure where people are getting that Nomura had no creative involvement in 3. He wrote the story of 3 as far as they can tell. Restrictions mainly came from Disney in the production of Disney Worlds. I don't think that they're saying he had no creative involvement. I just think that they're saying that Disney really put a leash on him in a lot of aspects. Which probably did impact the story pacing of Kingdom Hearts 3. Because the story pacing of Kingdom Hearts 3 was noticeably worse than the Kingdom Hearts games before it. And a lot of people think that might have been Disney and their restrictions, because it does add up for why that's the case. Like, I don't know. I find it really hard to think that it was definitely his own creative ambition to like just remake Let It Go in Unreal Engine 4 and not Disney just wanting to push that in there. So, but yeah, he definitely does. He's very hands-on with a lot of stuff. He definitely, whenever he's directing a game, he will go in and manually tweak dialogue for scenes and stuff like that, because he's really into everything fulfilling his vision, which is great. But yeah. Okay. Wait, hold on. It's crazy people talk about KH like it's primarily a Nomura thing when he is mostly administrative on that, and Oka is basically the Kitase equivalent to KH. The franchise has stopped being Nomura's pet project since the merger, where you can see his story taking a sit for Nojima and KH2 and Oka and BBS onwards. Nomura is more focused on the themes and execution of the characters and the story, which he used to reign over with KH1. They also confirmed that the Final Fantasy KH3 was written entirely by Nojima. I wish Nojima was writing the games in general again. Him and Nomura as a pair are just really awesome, which is why Versus 13 is such a tragedy, right? Because Versus was going to be them completely, weights off, training weights off, and just allowed to do whatever they wanted to do. Very sad. Okay, I think we're going to call it a stream there. Love you guys so much. We'll be back with another chatting stream on Friday, I think. And I will see you all soon. Okay, look forward to the next video. And if you haven't watched the Versus 13 video, please go check it out. I'll see you all next time.